Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kit and Clouder, and I'm excited to introduce you to our free rose coloring class for markers and pencils featuring Power Poppy stamps. This class has been created as a special thank you for our community and class members for an amazing 2019 together. I'm so grateful for your support to help in keeping our classes, community and giveaways, and free events for the Children's Hospital and Cancer Council running, and I hope you'll enjoy this special thank you from me. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to run through a few quick things, so please do watch this part of the video tutorial. Now, it's really important to understand that a coloring class is very different to a quick YouTube how-to video if you haven't done our classes before. This class today is going to focus on teaching you real, researched art fundamentals to help you actually understand why we do the shading we do to create depth. These fundamentals are then applied to absolutely every image you own. So what you're taking away here today is not just how to color this rose, but how to start expanding your knowledge and understanding of key skills to actually level up your coloring, no matter what your favorite style of images or topics are. Our classes are always technique driven, so if you're ever looking at which class you may want to try not to ever look at what the particular image or style of the class is, but look at what you're actually learning and taking away to enhance your skills for your favorite images after the lesson. The images are purely just the exercise for you to learn on. Classes are not about finished projects, even though we may be actually creating a finished piece like we are today. It's also never about being perfect or having your coloring be even close to what I'm doing in the class sample or what you may see others creating. Now, you may think that that's the point of doing it, that you do want your coloring to look like mine, but your aim here today is purely to challenge yourself to try. I want you to make mistakes, to experiment, to even intentionally scribble on the page to practice what you're working on, and to ask for help if you get stuck. Your aim is not to master this lesson or become a pro in one go. Even if you take away just one piece of information here today, you have succeeded and leveled up from where you were yesterday, regardless of what the finished piece looks like at the end. So I really want you to remember this. So please, right now, before we start, I want you to write the word practice on your page. You can write it off to the side so you can still use your image at the end, but anytime you may feel feelings of frustration or disappointment or needing to be perfect creep up, now these are perfectly normal things we all experience them when learning, but I want you to look at that word practice and remind yourself that this is all it is here today. It's just practice. No time or effort is ever wasted doing a practice because you don't need to be great to start, but you do actually need to start to be great. Now, if you're new to our classes, I always do free private tutoring one-on-one with you to help with personalized tips on your actual coloring. Now, if you're part of our Facebook community, this isn't actually where I do feedback. That's just for fun sharing with others who are learning just like you. Instead, please feel free to email me or you can Facebook message me direct any photos and we can work together on coloring tips, technology, or even if you're just feeling a little bit nervous or you're having a confidence wobble, I'm here to help you every step of the way. So please do reach out. Let's do this together. Now, the class today is going to be broken down into easy to manage chapters for you to work on at your own pace. It's really important to note that the majority of class members don't sit down and do a whole lesson in one go, and that can make it seem unattainable or like it's hard to start if you don't have huge blocks of free time. So set yourself small, manageable goals, either doing a chapter at a time or breaking it down even further to do smaller sections to suit the time you have available. At the start of each chapter, I'll be breaking down the art theories behind the coloring, which is applicable to both markers and pencils. So please make sure to always watch the start of the chapters regardless of what medium you're using. Then you will see that same chapter colored in both markers and pencils separately, and you can skip ahead to whatever medium you're using. I do actually talk and annotate as I'm actually coloring though, so you'll find the tips are a little different in each part of the video. If you use both mediums, you may pick up extra tips watching both parts of the video. Now, of course, as well, you've probably gone through your booklet that comes with this class where all of your colors are listed. You can use any colors in this tutorial. I'll be going through why I picked the colors I have, but you could easily just pick your favorite color blend out, even if you want to do a purple rose or a yellow rose. Your techniques are going to be the same, even if you have a totally different green color blend here today. Absolutely okay. Technique is not dependent on colors. We want to make sure we follow a few basic color rules, which you can actually find more information about on our coloring FAQ section of our website, explaining how we work with color to really show and communicate light source. But we have a whole bunch of example blends on our website. Just head to kitandclouder.com, click color blends at the top of the page, and you'll see some examples there. All of those are great to use. So please feel free to use what you prefer from your stash. You don't need to buy anything else today. And in fact, while it may be more convenient to use the same colors, you'll actually level up and feel more confident starting to branch out and use different things. So I always encourage you to please do that rather than waiting until you feel like you've got the absolute right supplies. You do not need to have everything 100% to really start learning. One color blend is all you need. And lastly, if you love this class, I would really love if you would consider sharing about it with your crafty friends on your blogs, Pinterest, wherever you like to spread the word. My mission is to help people feel comfortable and confident with their coloring and do whatever we can to help people level up and be proud of what they're creating, to be comfortable being a beginner so you can get to those next stages. The hardest part is reaching people who may like to join in. So if you think someone may benefit from this freebie, then I would love your help to spread the word. I think that's enough from me now, so how about we jump in and get ready to color. Now we'll be starting with chapter 1 with the leaves. Welcome to chapter 1 of the video tutorial. Now in this chapter, we're going to start with coloring up our leaves. Now I'm going to run through some of the art theories behind coloring the leaves before we jump in. So please watch this part of the chapter regardless of what medium you're using. Now the number one thing to help you achieve depth and realism in your coloring is actually understanding what light source is and how it works. Light source is the number one thing you need to learn first, as without light, we can't actually see an object's form. It does take time to understand though, it is quite a complex topic and you can't just learn it all in one lesson or even 10 lessons. There's a lot of different variations on the series depending on all different factors and depending on the objects themselves that you're coloring up. The only way to fully learn and understand is simply by practicing and going over the theories on all different topics. And this is why our monthly coloring class is so popular. So if you haven't seen this before, we actually do a monthly coloring project, and every month it's a totally different topic and a totally different bunch of techniques. Now, even though, say, you may love coloring flowers and then one month you may get animals, the great thing about that is you're being subjected to all different techniques, textures, light source, understanding form, objects, all those different things. And that's actually how you level up. You don't level up just by doing flowers every month if that's your favorite. So it's really, really important to diversify yourself as a colorist, because you're not watching this video because you just want to do a pretty project. You're watching this video because you actually want to level up, because you do want to learn. You're hungry for that new knowledge. So make sure that you don't get stuck in that rut of thinking, well, I don't really like that sort of topic, so I'm not going to do it. If you want to grow, it's time to start jumping in with all topics. It's like if you go to the gym and you're doing a class there and they play a song that's not your favorite, or they may be doing, say, legs and you really want to do an arms workout. You still benefit. You benefit hugely from it, but you just adapt a little bit to what you're being taught that day, because it's all important, even though you may love a certain style or topic a little bit more. So in saying that, I'm just going to run a quick clip now, just showing some of the basics of light source for you so you can get that little bit of an understanding before we jump in on our finished project. Now, when we colour anything at all, we need to be thinking about some art fundamentals that help inform our decisions in our colouring. Now, one of the most important art fundamentals that you will learn is the light source. And it's tricky to learn it at the start because it's a true art technique that not a lot of us really know about until we're taught it. But basically, whenever we're colouring an object, we need to imagine that light is illuminating the scene. So there's sun up in the sky or there's lights in the ceiling, and they shine down rays of light that hit the objects in our scene and illuminate them. Wherever those rays of light come down and hit first, they are our brightest areas, and we call them our highlights, and we show these using our lightest colours. The opposite of this is our shadow. So they're the darkest areas and the part that the light hits last. So we represent these with our darker markers. Now, in between highlight and shadow, we have midtone. Now, midtone is generally considered the true color of an object, as it's neither affected by light or shade. So that's a really good way of picking color blends as well. You can always start out with what you think the midtone color is going to be, and then picking markers lighter for your highlight and markers darker for your shadow. If you'd like to learn more about color theory and how we pick the colors to suit this, pop over to our website, kiddingclouder.com, and click on Classrooms, then Markers 101. It's a free class there that goes through color blends and how we choose them to work with light source and more light source instruction as well. But one of the most important things that we need to look at is cast shadow. Now, I've popped a pen over my hand here, and can you see the shadow that's on my hand? That's our cast shadow. It's a shadow that's cast by an object in front or above, which is my pen, onto an object below or behind, which is my hand. And what this does is it actually shows distance between objects. So the closer my objects are together, the darker and harder the shadows are here. Then the further apart they get, the lighter and more dispersed our shadows become. So you can see, utilizing cast shadows in our scene is very important to help to show different depth and levels in what we're seeing in a scene. So we're going to have areas that pop out towards us and areas that look like they're sitting further back. Don't worry if it sounds a little bit too overwhelming. We're going to be learning a lot about it today, and if you would like more of that basic instruction again, feel free to pop over to our website and head to that Markers 101 class where we'll break it down even further for you into those real basic fundamentals. Now we're going to be getting ready to move to chapter 1 of our colouring video here today, and we're firstly going to be working on skin tones. So now that we've talked about light source, let's actually look at how this is going to apply to the leaves that we're going to start colouring first. So easiest place to start, let's actually break this down. So the leaves component here that we're colouring today is made up of the stem. We've got a few thorns on the stem, and then we've got several different leaves in the scene here. So if you tend to feel overwhelmed colouring image, a really great way to get out of that mindset is to break it down one little aspect at a time. So instead of saying we're doing leaves, we're going to start and just do the stem, nice and easy. Then we'll do another leaf, and then we'll work through. So these can be little goals that you set your mind to. And if you suffer with anxiety or a lot going on in life behind the scenes and you're doing your colouring as relaxation, this is actually a really helpful tip to sort of act as a calming strategy as well. Because you're setting yourself little goals to do. It's your one achievement, what you hope to aim at is sitting down for your 15 minutes, 20 minutes, however long you give yourself to take that break. And this is your little step for your self-care. And having that little goal and that subsequent achievement at the end really can help with mindfulness and how you're emotionally and mentally feeling. So that's why it's really good to actually set goals and intentions before even picking up your pencils or markers. Okay, so let's come back to the stem. That's what we're starting with. Now you'll notice in the stem here, I've got darker colors along the outer edges here and a lighter color straight through the middle. Now the reason for that is the stem is rounded, and what we actually want to show is where the highest point of the stem is going to be the lightest. So the stem, think about it rounding around like this toward us. The highest point would actually be in the middle because the sides are rounding down. Now as our light comes down from above, it hits that middle, that highest point first, and that's why this appears lighter. Notice the sides round away. So because they're rounding away from the light, that's why you get darker on the edges. Now, as I explained just in that light source little section that you just watched, we're working with ambient light today. So like the sun in the sky or lights up in the ceiling. They cast really big cones of light over your whole project. It's not like working with a spotlight. So if you've, say, watched a YouTube video before on coloring basics, what you may notice is that when people color an image, one side dark, one side light, because they're imagining like a light's coming down from the left like this, and so everything on this left side is going to end up all nice and light, and everything on this right side, because it's further away, is going to end up all dark. But it doesn't really work like this so much when you're working with ambient lighting. So this is more like a spotlight. So imagine if you had like a torch or something shining an actual directional beam of light. That's what would give you that sort of lighting, when it's really obviously on one side. When you have the sun or lights right up in the sky at a central point, you actually tend to get a really nice central lighting, and you'll actually get shadows and highlights falling on both sides of the image, just depending on the form of the object. And this is why ambient lighting is more used for photography, for things like portraits, because we don't really want half the face in shadow. We want just to have natural, soft shadows falling as the object itself is sort of rounding away from the light. But all the areas popping up toward us are nice and bright. They capture your eye. They're not in shadow. They're just nice and even. So that's what we're showing here today. The stem, the rays point up towards us, nice and light, as that's where the light's hitting. The sides, both sides, not just one, curving away from the light, so end up darker. And that's what creates that rounded shape to our eye. Now, this is the same, like this is why I was explaining before about, doing classes on different topics, how it's so important. You can take something as simple as what I've just said now and apply that to character stamps. All of a sudden, this thin little stem is the same as a leg. And so you may be going, what? But think about the actual shape of the leg. Yes, it's going to be thicker on your character stamps, but it's essentially still a rounded, cylindrical object like the stem of the rose here. So we actually follow those same theories. So you may have colored legs before and just added shadows down one side. However, if you're working with ambient lighting and it's just a nice general light, you typically would have shadows to both sides as the object rounds away, because your highest point is not the edge of the leg. It's the middle. The middle is popping up towards you. That's where your light's hitting. That's where we need it to look rounded and the lightest and brightest part, sides being darker. So see, all of a sudden, you've learned a little bit about light source here today. We've learned how to color the stem of the rose, but also how to take that away and start applying it to other images you color up. And this is, again, the monthly class. For those of you who already do this, this is why it's so important, because you may not realize, but every little time we go over things like this in our lessons, it's ingraining itself more and more into your mind. You're starting to understand how objects and forms work, how the geometry works and corresponds with your light source. So even though it can feel really overwhelming, you can think, what? I haven't even thought about that before. The more you do, the more it sinks in. And I'm just going to say one more thing too on this topic. If you feel confused or overwhelmed, it's absolutely okay. I don't want you to feel like this is just too hard, because it's not. It's just that it's new. It's like, when you start a new job and you get all that information on day one and you think, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to be able to do this job or remember everything I've been taught? You don't have to retain all the information on day one. You remember little bits. And then you'll do the class again and you remember a little bit more. Then you'll do a different class and we'll talk about the same thing we've touched on in this class. And then you start to build those foundations. But you're not going to remember it all today. So don't worry about that overwhelmed feeling. Just take a deep breath, let it all go. You're going to do a great job. We're just running over some of these technical things before we jump in. And when we jump in, it starts making a lot more sense. Okay, so we've talked about the stem. Now I want to talk really quickly about the leaves before we get colouring. So you may be thinking I'm doing a lot of talking at the start. I am, because a lot of the colouring and a lot of art actually has theories and fundamentals behind it. A lot of people say art has no rules. And while that's great and true, and you can do whatever you like with your art, art definitely has guidelines that help you to create more visually aesthetic works, more visually pleasing. And that's what we're going over today. Some of those rules and guidelines that we actually see in everyday life, and how to start incorporating that in your colouring. So the leaves here, few things. We've got these beautiful veins, nice, rich and thick, coming through the leaves and all these little parts coming off. Now you'll notice these are darker. Now there's two reasons for that. Typically in a lot of leaves, the veins can be seen as darker. Sometimes they're brighter. So that can even be a style choice. You may choose to do different colors depending on the species and type of leaf that you're doing. Another reason though for that is typically the vein comes in. So if I cut this leaf in half, imagine it like this. The sides of the leaf are coming in and down to a little point, and that's where the vein sits. It's sort of back a little bit from the top of the leaves. And because it's back like this, we actually get less light between these two sections. So that ends up a lot darker. And that's why the vein itself can look darker, because we're actually creating an indent in the leaf surface. A really good rule of thumb to blend out any veins that are meant to look like indents is we add the darker line and we blend out getting lighter toward the tip of the leaf. So you can see there, dark line, getting lighter toward the tip. Dark line, getting lighter toward the tip. And that's how I followed this through on each one. It's only softly blended out, not a lot of contrast between color here. High contrast between light and shade will give you more of a shiny look, and that's what we're aiming for more in these petals. Whereas down here, the colors don't have as much contrast, so we still are able to clearly see light versus shadow, but it's not as strong, so the colors look a bit more matte. Now, one other thing I'm going to explain as well. Notice this little part here, how this comes across and in front, and it looks a lot lighter than the section behind. The way we want to think of this on the leaf is think of it as one. So it comes around and the side comes back and curves in on itself. That's actually what's happening here. Now what's actually happened is we can now start thinking of that as two objects. So you've got this object, which is sitting in front of this object. Back to my hand, this object here sitting in front of this one. Now remember at the start we talked about cast shadow. When one object is sitting in front of another object, it casts a shadow back on the object below or behind, showing the differences in the heights. And that is what happens here. You've now all of a sudden got two objects. The one in front casts a shadow straight underneath. And that's what we're showing here as well. Nice deep dark shadow around that part that's in front. And that actually helps us visually see the levels between what's in front and what's further back. And we want to do the same whenever we look at other parts of the image and look at what's overlapping. Two leaves here, same thing. Now which one's in front? We can see by following the outline around where it intersects. This leaf here comes straight through and over the top of that leaf there. Where the intersection is, the line keeps going around and across, showing that this leaf is in front of this one below. So we do a nice deep dark shadow around, shadow always on the object below, and that helps to show the distance between the two objects. Also nice deep dark shadow around the flower petals as well. Lastly, I did just touch on color before, but you'll notice that I've got these tiny little bits of pink or soft red sort of peeking through there. We're creating a little bit of color variation on the leaves. Some leaves do have this and not always just green. So it's a really great thing if you're coloring up something that's meant to look a little bit more realistic. You can jump on Google and have a look at some reference photos of what you're actually coloring up. So specifically different types of flowers, animals, things like that are really good to get reference photos of, so you can see how the markings and the texture work on those objects and start to incorporate them in your coloring. If you're ever looking at photos though and you really want to really want to be really specific in how you're actually using that source material. You want it to be almost exact. It's really important that you do look for royalty-free images on Google. So royalty-free images mean it's okay for you to use that and to copy that if you want in your works, just depending on what the terms are from where you're getting them from. Don't just take any image from Google and copy though, because if it is someone's personal work, that could be infringing on their intellectual property as well. So just make sure that you're always checking those sort of things out. If you are using images as inspiration, there's a lot of free websites you can use and a lot of websites where you can buy commercial licenses or personal licenses to actually use that in your artworks as well if you like something on one of those websites. So I'd always like to just say that just so you know and are aware of how to get some inspiration for your coloring as well. Okay, so that is enough from me, I think. Are you ready to color? I think it's time. We've gone through a lot of technique here already and we haven't even started yet. So it's time to take what we've been talking about and apply this to your coloring. Now I'm going to start with my pencils firstly here, and then I'll move on to markers. And you can fast forward to whatever medium you're using. Welcome to the pencils portion of the video tutorial. Now you should have watched the start of the video first. I know it's long, we go through a lot of theory, so it's really important to watch this part if you haven't yet. I promise it's full of helpful information. And you should have watched that so you're comfortable with what we're actually going to do and why here today. Now we're going to just jump in and start the coloring. Now, just to get you in the swing of things, I'm going to run through some pencil blending basics before we actually get started on our rose here today. Now, even if you're in our classes and you've watched this part before, I always recommend to watch this again, just so you can feel comfortable, do some basic practice blends before you get started on your final image. So when we color with our pencils, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is paper. So it's really important that we have a good drawing paper when we're coloring with the pencils. Drawing paper generally has what we call a tooth. So tooth is like a printed texture into the paper, and that texture grips and holds the pigment. That's what allows you to layer and blend up, so you're getting complex blends, and allows you to keep the colors smooth. Now, the paper that I'm using here today is Mitont by Canson. There are many different brands that are available. We do have a big write-up on those on our website as well. You can head to kitandclouder.com, click FAQs, then Coloring FAQs, and you'll see papers there. Now the paper I'm using, if you're using the same one I am today, please make sure that you're using the right side. This is one of the only dual-sided papers on the market. So you may feel that your paper is dual-sided because it's got a texture side and the other side smooth, but that's not actually dual-sided. It's only just been printed on one side and the rest is just the standard paper. Whereas this one has two different textures. So the side I'm printing on is a little bit softer. The other side, the way you can tell, is this side here. Notice it's got these little bumps all over there, like little circles. We call that the honeycomb print. Now that's for holding chalks and pastels and more heavy media like this. So we tend not to use this side. It takes a lot longer to blend out because the tooth is bigger to hold that different type of material. So I'm using the reverse side here. So if you are using the Mitont paper, just make sure you've got it on that right side. If you're using a different drawing paper, you'll want that textured side so you can grip the pigment. Now, if you are using a smooth paper here today, that's okay. It's all practice and you're still going to be going over the techniques and it's still going to help you learn, but it's going to be a little harder to blend smooth. Your key here today is to go really slow and really soft as you build up the colors. That's going to help you gain a little bit more control. So no matter what paper you're using though, pencil work is all about going slow and soft with the blending. It's important to always keep your pencils nice and sharp. That gives you control and allows you to push the pigment down the page. And it's all about blending in really little soft layers. So we just build the pencil up over and over with multiple layers and strokes. And you can see the more layers I add, it grips into the paper and I'm slowly flattening that paper down. It's really important as you're blending though to be aware of the size of your strokes. If you're finding it hard to blend your paper smooth, if you're new to using paper with a tooth, it's probably because your strokes are too big at this point. So we want to make sure our strokes are only really small, and I even like to use small circles to push the paper flat as I blend. Keeping that pencil sharp really does help with that as well. Now, instead of coming in with a hard texture and pressing it all flat straight away, the reason why we go soft is it allows us to build up those blends. So if I come in here nice and softly with one color, you can see I'm not placing any pressure down, but then I'm able to come back over with the next color and continue to blend out. Notice I've got no lines between my colors here, and then it's all about going back, building up the layers so you've got the control. Obviously we use a few more colors in this here today, but you can see the idea. I'm slowly filling in the tooth, having control over my blend, and getting those transitions nice and flat. Now, what you may find when you're starting out with pencils, it's normal to be a little heavy-handed. Now, I'll just show you what happens if we're a little bit too heavy-handed. If we come in here and we lay down our color, notice how my color is ending in a straight, hard line there. Now, as I come over to blend, what happens? You can see that line in between the colors. I haven't blended them smooth. That's because there was just too much pressure and I flattened down the tooth and the page too quickly. That means that there's no grip left for any more pigment, so I wasn't able to get that smooth. That's why we want to always focus on going nice and slow and soft so we do have that control over the duration of the blend. However, here's a little trick to help today. This is one that I have made up called fuzzying up the edge, technical term. So if you come in and you're a little heavy-handed and you find you've got that line, it's not ruined. What I want you to do to focus on here is come back in really nice and slow and soft, and come back over your edges here to fade them out. And I just go over the top to soften down. You can hold the pencil further back as well. That'll allow you to place less pressure on the pencil. And then once you've flattened that down, just make sure that the next color you come in with is nice and soft. And then you should be able to come back here, nice small little circles to blend. And you can see we're able to get those transitions smoother. So that's a good little tip to keep in mind today as you blend. Going back over, fuzzing up any edges that look a little bit too hard, but making sure overall that you're patient with your pencil coloring. It's about slow, soft layers for control. It's not a race to finish here today. Enjoy being in the moment to create that finished piece. Now, one last thing before we jump in. One tool that I'm going to be using here today that you're going to see is our Kitten Clatter pencil dusters. Now, every so often, you're going to see me just wiping the page off like this, removing any of the dust that falls from my pencil. Now, the reason why this is important is if you're not constantly removing those little bits of pigment that are falling off, you can accidentally push them down into the page and smudge the pigment in. It'll give you a dirty look and you'll get little speckles all over your coloring. So you can use many different things to do this. I used to use a feather because it was really soft, like a little emu or ostrich feather, and just brush away the pigment with this. The problem that I had with them is they kept breaking all over our page. So what I actually did when a lot of people requested what to use, I actually had these dusters made up for us. So I've actually picked the bristles that we use on these, so they are super, super soft. They're softer than most of the art brushes and makeup brushes that are out there as well, to make sure that you're not pushing the pigment down, because you do have to be careful when you're brushing away that you're not using force, which is encouraging that pigment to grip into the tooth of the paper. But you can use whatever you have on hand, just be really gentle. If you did want to check out our dusters though, we do have a few left over in our shop. They do have free worldwide shipping as well. Okay, let's get ready to jump in. I'm going to move this off to the side. Let's start with our darkest color in the blend. It's going to be my dark green, and I'm adding this to the side of the stem here now, creating those edges that are rounding away from us and away from the light. So you can see here, I'm just applying the color nice and soft like we just talked about. I'm not using any pressure because it's more important to build softly in these first layers. Pencils is about many, many soft layers rather than coming in too hard and sharp because you lose that level of control. You can see coming around the thorn, I haven't fully outlined it. I'm using that no lines version of the image here today, and so it's really important that we don't just come through an outline because we'll lose that softness and that whole point of actually using the soft lines. But in this case, we do definitely add the color down both sides of the stem because that's where our shadow is falling, that form shadow. Now on this larger thorn, I'm applying the color toward the bottom because I'm imagining my light coming down from above. It's hitting this top side first and that ends up a little bit lighter. So darker color toward the bottom there, showing the side that's darkest. So usually on any objects that sort of come out on a horizontal, the bottom is going to be darker because of that light coming from above. Let's just leave it there to begin with. We'll do the leaves after. And now I'm just going to work through my colors. So the next color I'm going to use is grass green. And all I'm doing is coming literally straight over the top, nice and soft, the same amount of pressure. And I'm extending a little further in toward our highlight, which is the middle of the stem here. Coming up that thorn toward the underside. And as we add more colors, it's going to fill in that tooth on the paper, flattening everything down. But we're not aiming to get rid of all the tooth just yet. So apple green is next, and again straight over the top and extending a little further in. We're using quite a few colors even though the stem is quite small. That's to keep it consistent with our leaves because not all the colors we use are to help you transition from dark to light. A lot of the time the colors you use are for tone. So you can see here this color adds a little bit more of a yellow to the green blend because this is a yellow based green, and so it's toning out some of those colors that you've already got there, creating new colors and new blends. That starts to get pretty complicated when we talk about how colors work. We've got a really big class called Perfecting Pencils that goes through all those fundamentals if that's something you want to learn about. So that one's really helpful, goes through how we create colors and why, what tone is, and all the different parts of color theory. It's a really good fundamentals lesson. Use my pencil duster and just get rid of any dust that's accumulating on our page. Make sure you do this every so often. Spring green is next, and again straight over the top of the previous and extending a little further in. Now this is the last color in the blend that I'm using, but I am not coloring over the whole area. As you can see, I've got a little slither of paper showing through, which is where my lightest point is going to be, and I'm saving that for my white pencil. We'll use the white pencil to amplify the highlight, really show where that light is coming through and hitting. So make sure again that you've only worked nice and soft. There's no harsh lines, and if there are, just come back and really softly fuzzy them up so everything ends nice and soft, and you can use that white to really enhance it. So now grab your white pencil and we're going to come straight through the middle only. And we're coming back in small little circles just where the green has ended, not coming the whole way back to my shadow area, because what would happen then is I would tint the color. And tinting is when you use your white or black to alter the value of the color, and the value being how light or dark that color actually is. So if I was to add white over the very darkest shadows, it's going to make them look almost pastel because I've really lightened them up. So we stick only through that highlight area, just going very softly back and forth, just to blend where the green has ended into the white so it's nice and soft. So that's after one full layer of the blend. Now you can see here, we can actually see that light source. So we've got the darker shadows on the side, lighter through the middle there. But the color is maybe not nice and deep, and we've got these little white speckles showing through. So that is the tooth of my paper, and whenever you can see the tooth still showing, it means it can hold more. So what we do is we sharpen up our pencils, always working with nice sharp points, and we're going to come back and we're going to repeat everything again. Now the way we get it flat is not actually by pressing down any harder. It's actually by making the strokes a little smaller. So what we'll do is we'll sharpen our pencils, and then now as we come in, we're still going to go just as soft as we did the first time. But now I'm going to target specific areas. And you'll see here, I'm just following along, working in each little bit at a time. And because I'm targeting those areas now, rather than just nice big long strokes, it focuses on pressing that tooth flat. So small little circles, no extra pressure. That way we can make sure that the edges are nice and soft and fuzzy, and it will blend well with the next color in the blend. But always sharpest points are easiest to work with, and you'll notice that every so often I'm twisting my pencil as I work. That's because when I work on one side, what happens is you blunt one side of the pencil. So when I twist it, I'm twisting it around to the side that's a little sharper, and I can keep going back and forth until I really feel like it's quite blunt and it needs another twist in my sharpener to bring it back. So you don't need to give it a big long sharpen, it's just another twist or two when you do it, just so you bring that point back up. Coming along the bottom of that thorn there, just to create that little bit of depth. Now at the very top here, I'm going to add a little bit more of this darker color because I'm showing a cast shadow below those leaves. So the leaves come and sit over the top just like we talked about earlier, so they add a stronger cast shadow. Next color I'm going to be using is grass green, so we can blend out that cast shadow a little bit, just softly. And we'll focus on bringing down those particular areas. Apple green, blend that in toward the highlight in the middle. And spring green. I'm bringing this through. Now again, I'm still leaving that little bit of white through the center area so we can pull through our white pencil and really focus on that highlight. I am bringing this color just to the other side of the thorn here now. So you're just creating a softer outline on the top because it is still rounding. So in the edge, we want that to look a little bit darker because it's still rounding around. That very edge is not the lightest point. It's more in toward the middle of the thorn. So I've used the spring green, this lighter color, to create that edge. And then we can bring our white pencil through the highlights. And just again blending back over where the green has ended. Now sometimes you may find the little edge ends up a little fuzzy. What you can even do is bring your white pencil just next to the edge, and it can just remove any of those fuzzy lines. You can even use a colorless blender pencil as well. So the blender pencil here, what that actually is, it's the same core as your pencil. So mine are Prismacolor pencils that I'm using right now. So the Prismacolor being a wax-based pencil. So my Prismacolor blender is a wax-based blender. It's just the core of the pencil without any pigment to it. So essentially, it can help you blend without using your colored pencils. Now, the thing is though, it doesn't blend fully smooth. You're always going to get the brightest and the most control over your pencils by using just the pencils themselves. You can use things like blenders, solvents, Gamsol, etc. with your pencil work, but they always dilute it down a little bit, because what you need to think about is you're now pushing pigment. Rather than blending it in together, you're not adding anything else. You're actually pushing around what's already on the page. So it's diluting it down. You're losing a little bit of that control. But it can be really good for getting last little bits of tooth or blending really big areas where you don't need it to be 100% smooth. But on things like, say if I was doing a character's face, I'd never want to use something like a blender pencil because it can end up looking muddy. You've lost a bit of control. We're not able to really get that soft, smooth finish like we can with just the pencils themselves. But in this aspect, and it's probably not going to show on the camera because it's really small, but there's these tiny little imperfections and parts that are along the edge. I can actually use my blender to press that flat, make the line a little crisper, and just remove any last little bits of the tooth there. But you want to be careful that you're only coming over the parts that need it, because if I start blending and pushing, I'm pushing that pigment around, and that's where you can mix colors or accidentally push darker colors into lighter areas. So you just want to be a little bit careful, but experiment with using it. We do use it a lot in our classes because it's a great shortcut for things like that. But again, pick when you're using it. Don't just use it all the time. But these are tools that can help you enhance your coloring with your pencils. And that is the stem there all done. Now, I talked about adding a little bit of rosy discoloration through the stem and leaves. We'll do that at the end. So this is going to be like a top layer. So we'll do everything in the bright greens first, and then we'll come back and add to it. So now we're going to move on to the leaves. Sharpen up your pencils again before the step so you have some nice control. Okay, jumping straight into the leaf. Now we're going to work on this one over here. We talked about the light source for this leaf already. So remember when we had this part curving back in on itself. So this part here being in front, so it means we're going to have a nice thick cast shadow around. So I'm actually starting by adding in that cast shadow. I always think it's a great thing to add cast shadows in first, especially if you're new to coloring, because then you're less likely to forget. If you know where it is and you can plan for it and you know it's step one, then it's going to help you always remember. Now, I often see people just do coloring for fun and they say, well, I didn't bother to add in cast shadows because I'm just doing it just to zone out. But they're still using all the other facets of light. So if you're going to do some light source parts, start incorporating all. These little things are how you level up your coloring. Every time you pick up your pencils is a chance for you to practice and improve. It's not a hard step, and if it's something you forget, just write it down somewhere. Cast shadows first. Nice and easy, and it will become second nature just by actively practicing. At the start, it is hard. It's hard to remember, and it was for me too. But again, the more you do it, the easier and more consistent you're going to be. Now I'm going to use this pencil to add in our vein lines. Now the great thing about Power Popping Images that I love is she draws in a lot of this detail for us. And while it's great to use the detail that an artist has, a lot of times artists won't draw that. So today it's great we can use those details as guidelines, but when you come to an image that doesn't have them, you can always draw these veins in yourself. All we do is start by coming through the middle here, and I'm just tracing what Marcella, the artist, has already done. And then you can come through and add your veins. Now I'm adding these super soft, no pressure on that pencil when you're adding them in, because we want to be able to blend these out. We don't want them to be too hard and strong. Now there's some big gaps between some of these, so you can even come through and add a few more to break up some of those larger areas. I am going to come through and do a little bit of shading here too, because I don't want them to just be lines. So we did talk about at the start how we blend out these veins toward the tip of the leaf. And you can see I'm just coming on the side that is closest to the tip and starting to add a little bit of shading where the vein is meeting, or these side veins are meeting the middle. And it's just helping to add depth. It's not just a line, it's now shading that you're thinking about. In the outer edges, I'm going to work with the little serration that the artist has drawn as well. So what I'm going to do here is come along the inside edge, along the tip, and start to just pull it back along the top, but just a little bit. So again, we're not outlining the leaves. We're working with those shapes, adding in little shadows where we've got movement. And then along the top here. So always try to avoid just outlining. Think about where the light's hitting or where it's going to be darker. Now on the underside here, I'm not going to add the shadow the whole way. I'm going to add it to the highest point, the darkest point here, and that's going to be through this section. That's the part that's getting the absolute least light because it is quite far from where our light is hitting down the sides here. So again, you're just avoiding the outline look, but adding the color only to your very shadow areas. Now it's time to blend out, and I'm going to be using grass green next. So I come straight over the top of what I've just done. Cast shadow first. Always blend out your cast shadows, don't just leave them as lines. And I'm just going to take my time and blend out some of these lines that I've created. So you're slowly blending these toward what's going to be your highlight area. Next color, apple green. So you can see what we're doing is we're just working from dark to light, but I'm bringing the colors over the previous to tone them out here. So adding in a little bit of that yellow green as we're coming through to our mid-tone areas. And slowly pulling out to where my highlight's going to go. A good rule of thumb is that you're using each color equally when you're using just a standard light source. So if you've got more colors than I do or less colors than I do that you want to use for a particular blend because you're swapping out to what your favorites are, just use each one equally. It's always going to give you the most cohesive look. Spring green is next. And again, straight over the top and bringing that a little further up. Now I'm sort of tracing that shape. We've got those curved lines there. I'm leaving the very edge uncolored because we'll use that white just to come through that top. And it's going to show that on this sort of edge here, the light's coming through and it is hitting that edge. So it really shows that that part is sitting higher than the main part of the leaf. And again, I'm coming straight over the top and extending toward the edge. And you'll notice that each of these side veins here have all blended and gotten lighter toward the tip of the leaf like we talked about. Now at that highest point, just before it does hit the next line, you'll notice again I've left that little slither of white. So I'm not coloring over the whole area in green. Leaving tiny little parts of white can help you control the vibrancy of that light source, really control that contrast that's happening there and communicate where the light is hitting even stronger. So that's what we've done. You can see all the detail is there, but the color is not very rich and we've got all that tooth showing through. So all we need to do is repeat. Nice and easy. So coming straight over the top. When we do our classes, one thing that's really, really important is to try and practice mindfulness. Now, if you're part of our Facebook community where we all chat, you'll notice I bring this up a lot. Mindfulness is really important to help in managing stress, feelings of overwhelm and anxiety, and just helping you be present, feel a lot more balanced. The reason why I talk about this a lot with your classes is your classes are a mindfulness activity. 2 types of activities you can do to relax. You've got mindless, things like just picking up your pencils and just coloring without instruction or anything like that. It's usually a mindless coloring. Watching your TV, mindless activity. Just sort of vegging out is counted as mindless. And it's still important because you're just resting. These activities here, doing a lesson or say working out or other activities like that where you are a bit more actively engaged, these are called mindful activities. And this is where you activate different parts of your brain to be challenged and you actually occupy your mind. So when you occupy your mind, you're actually taking more of a break from stresses around you because you're actually stopping your mind from thinking and processing and going over and having that anxiety and worry that comes with everyday life. So this is what actually gives you a little bit of a mental break and relax and recharge. And then we blend out. Next color, grass green. So this is why it's really important. I always see people say, oh, things are so busy right now, I don't have time to do my classes. This is why it's crucial to make time because it's about self-care. It's got nothing to do with the actual coloring, really. It's just the activity, but it's actually to do with giving yourself an important mental break to recharge, to feel more balanced and less stressed, and it helps you better deal with what's going on. It helps you better take care of others if you're in a situation where you're a caretaker or someone's quite sick. It helps you better perform at work as well. And it's so important to have a good balance between the mindless and the mindful activities so you can actually have a good quality and balance of life. So please, when you do feel overwhelmed and stressed in life, make time for these activities. Make time for you. Make you a priority. It helps so incredibly much. And yet we go into this, I think it's a sense of guilt that we can't possibly take a bit of a time out for ourselves when things are full on. So we go into a bit of an overdrive and we say we can't actually take a break because there's so much going on, we need to be focused. And it has the reverse effect because you end up frazzled, you end up overwhelmed. So you do need to step back when things happen in life. If you've got illness, a family member's got illness, work stress, anything like that, then as soon as you feel that frustration or that anxiety build up, that is your body letting you know you need to take a break because you don't want to burn out. Please don't ever allow yourself to feel that way. And spring green. Now, how much or how little of each color you use will control how light or dark your color blend ends up. So we actually call this the value of the color. That's how light or dark the color actually is. There's nothing wrong with having a lighter leaf or having a darker leaf. It just depends on what you yourself are trying to communicate. So if you've used more of the darker colors than I have, yours is going to look darker. If you've used less, yours is going to look lighter. Nothing wrong with those little things being different. What you'll do in time though is you'll learn how to control that value. So by intentionally using larger quantities of lighter versus darker colors to be able to get those different levels to show that it is a darker blend or a lighter blend just with those same set of colors. So using the white here now with the white, I'm starting in my highlight area. And I'm blending just back and over where the green has ended. I'm not taking it the whole way to the shadow. Just going through those highlight areas. So you should get a nice fade from the green to the white of the paper. It's really important though that you don't use any pressure. It's just super soft. You're not using this to flatten tooth. You're using this to merge colors and get smooth transitions between color and highlight. That leftover white of the paper. Sometimes using the white can tint the colors like we talked about, making them appear really softer. You might be happy with that, or you might want it to be deeper and darker. You can control it just by doing more layers. You can always come back with your colors again and add them back over the top to build it up even more depth. These little things are totally up to you. They start becoming your stylistic choice, and they're going to change every time you color, because sometimes you might use more pressure, sometimes you might use less, sometimes you might use more darker colors. It's going to be different always, so it's going to be up to you to assess your work and see what it needs. Same here as well, like I can come back and add, say, maybe a bit more mid-tone color. If I feel like my shadow is nice and deep already, but I want some stronger mid-tone, I can just come back and start playing and layering now, just based on the look that I want. You also may need more or less layers than what I've done. When you start out, you're generally just learning about pressures and how much pressure you need to get your blends and everything like that and to flatten. That takes a little bit of play and experiment. You usually don't just ace it in one go. So you may find you need way more layers than I do at the moment, because you may find you're very, very careful with laying down that color. Or you may find you've actually been very heavy-handed and you've pressed down really hard and you've flattened all that tooth a lot quicker than I did. Both things are okay. It just means you're playing and experimenting. You get comfy only with practice. So I never want you to say, oh, I can't do this. It's not that you can't do it. It's that you're just simply still learning. I often get people say when they're starting out, oh, I don't like paper with a tooth. I can't use it. And it's not that you can't use it. It's that you haven't yet perfected how. So that's a really, if I can give you any advice today, if you learn one thing, please make it be that. Please, it's not about the paper, but it's about any technique. It's not that you can't do it. It's that you are still learning how. But to give up on something just because you can't do it, that's your failure right there. I never want you to do that. I want you to go, okay, I'm not mastering yet. I'll ask Elise for some extra tips, then I'm just going to practice it. I'm going to practice it as hard as I can. And that's when you're going to perfect it. And then, and only then, can you say, well, I actually prefer this paper, or I prefer this way of doing it. Because you're not choosing to do something out of what's easy. You're choosing to do something because you simply prefer it, but you can do both. I want you to become the master of doing all of it so you can actually choose based on preference rather than level of ease. That's a really, really important thing that I hope I can impart on you today. Because if you can do that, then you can color anything on any type of anything and you'll be as good as you want to take it to. But as soon as you start saying, I see it a lot even with things like characters. Oh, characters are tricky, skin and hair really hard, don't like coloring characters. And so whenever there's a character class, I'll say, oh no, I don't like that. And hair isn't for me. Flicks are very difficult. And it's not that it's not for that person. It's that they just haven't learnt yet and they're still coming to terms with it, still getting comfy with it. So that sense of discomfort makes us say, well, we don't like it. But you can do it. Please know you can do it. You just need more practice. It's one thing when I started, I really wanted to get good at hair. So I would always pick the images that were really hard because I wanted to master them. And it was hard and it was challenging, but that's how I became better at that. And that's now one of my favorite things to color. Okay, we've got these other leaves now. Let's move on. So I'm going to work on the big one here. Now we've got overlapping elements now happening. So you can see in this little cluster, I've got a rose petal, a leaf, and another leaf. So we need to think about that cast shadow like we talked about earlier. When things are overlapping, look for the top object. That'll cast a shadow on the next object. And if there's another one, that's going to cast a shadow on that. So we break it down into levels. Okay, so petal, first and foremost, is in front. So anything underneath is going to get the shadow. So nice and soft, come straight around that. And you can see here we're doing this cast shadow first. Like I talked about before, adding it in so we don't forget it. Now no shadow here because obviously that's no leaves or anything, that's just space. So we're not adding that in. But I am going to bring the shadow underneath that next part of the petal. Now, this leaf here is sitting in front of this one. So we're now going to come underneath and add in our shadow there. Now don't forget this leaf has little spikes on it, so we're going to try and come around those. And we're adding shading, so not just a line, but actually fleshing it out and creating shading there. Now from here, we're going to add in the veins. So nice and easy, Marcella has added those in for us. We can just trace around. You can see I'm just penciling them very lightly. Some of these veins as well have little offshoots, so you can choose to add them in if you like, totally up to you. These little details as well never need to look the same as mine. You may find they're always a little bit different just based on what you want to communicate. Coming up the little thorns, just like we did on the other leaf as well. Obviously now they're facing in different directions, so just keeping that in mind too. That this leaf, the tip is now here rather than back here, so you slightly change that direction. Okay, now instead of leaving this as just lines, let's start blending out. So straight over the top, and you're just fleshing out a little bit. So we never want to just leave something as a line. Always add a little bit of shading. We can even go ahead and do some of the other leaves as well. When you're comfortable, I actually like to work this way, like you use one color at a time and then do multiple elements. It just makes it feel a little bit quicker as well, and you're getting more sort of accomplished as you're working in each layer. Just adding a little bit of shading to those thorns. It's harder to see though because you've got the cast shadow underneath. So you're not really able to come and outline as much like we did here because you've already got those dark around the edges. Another little leaf on the side, cast shadow beneath the petal. And we come around. And we just work with the veins that are already there. Now this is a little bit smaller, so you may find you need to sharpen your pencil if you're finding it hard to get control. So remember, anytime control is hard, sharpen up that pencil and keep your pressure soft. Soft pressure always equals finest lines. One more little leaf up here hiding away. So cast shadow at the top here around the petals because the petals are in front. And then we just pull the vein down the side. Alright, now we blend out. So the next color we're going to use, grass green. And all we're going to do is we're going to come straight over the top and then just work on blending out. So exactly what we've been doing. So now it's repeating the same technique. Now, a really big part of how we actually learn new things is repetition. You will never master a technique the first time you do it, but each and every time you try, you get a chance to improve upon what you're learning. It sinks in a little bit more. You're able to refine, to look at your work and think, how can I do this a little bit differently so I'm happier with the result? These little things are what make you better. So having a class where you repeat a technique like this is always really helpful, and even having months where you do similar images. So in our monthly class, you may do animals one month and then a few months later you may do them again. You may think, well, we just did fur not long ago. But it's a little sneaky trick of mine. I'm incorporating some new but some repetitive tasks. So you do practice and level up that skill. You get a little bit of time to go back over it. And that's how you're going to improve and get better and better. So don't ever become complacent. Try not to rush through. Bring yourself back to the present moment and be mindful. Watch the colors, the blending, everything else you're doing, so you can be patient, so you can enjoy the process, and you can focus on what you're doing here today to improve. It's never a rush. This is your you time, your time out, where you have a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a mind twist, and sometimes it can feel like that's overwhelming, but it's not. It's just because it's new info. But it actually helps you take that break from overwhelming life a bit more, like we talked about, because you're activating that challenge muscle or mindset to allow you to stop thinking about some of the other pressures. So don't rush yourself through this process. Be in this process. And try every time you're doing one of these leaves and you're repeating a task, try thinking about what you can do a little bit differently to improve your result. Doesn't matter if each leaf looks a little different. Class time, like we said at the start, class time's experiment time. I would rather you scribble on this page, make lots of mistakes, and feel at the end like, hey, I was starting to get that because I tried all these different things. And I learned also what not to do in the process. That's what's going to make you better. So I'd rather you do that and play than try and just focus on perfect. Actually look at the coloring and think, okay, maybe I'm pressing down a little bit more. This is apple green next. Maybe I'm pressing down too hard, so I need to soften my pressure. So the next leaf, you may try really hard to focus on softening pressure out. Don't just keep doing the same thing over and over. Actually think it through. And remember, nothing's ever wrong. Try not to say, well, I really struggle with this, or this isn't perfect. I want you to instead go, well, next time I might just try this to get this result. I might try softening my pressure so the colors look lighter so I have more control. Notice straight away, you take away the negativity and you replace it with constructive learning. This is really important. We go through this a lot in our Facebook group if you're a member over there. If you're not, please do come and join us, because attitude to learning and to making mistakes is a big factor in whether or not you succeed or you fail, because it directly influences your confidence and your motivation. It's not being silly with optimism though either. It's not just being like, oh, this is amazing. It's actually saying, okay, like I understand that I'm learning. I'm a beginner at new techniques and I improve them by experimenting. That's all you're doing, is you're saying, okay, well, next time let's try this. So you're not telling yourself it should be perfect. You're telling yourself it's not meant to. You don't need to strive for that. All you need to do is strive for playing, enjoying, and learning. You do that, you will grow. Spring green is next. And you can see now we start to get a lot further out, but we're not covering all of the white space. We're leaving a little bit because we'll use that white pencil to enhance our highlights as well. But you are covering most of the space. Each color should really be used equally. Next color is the white, and let's bring this through the highlight back and over where that green has ended. Softly taking that edge away and you're blending it all through. Okay, almost there, but we can see lots of tooth showing through, so what do we need to do? We're going to repeat and build up those layers. Now remember, sharp pencils always give best control. So dark green now, and you're just repeating. No extra pressure, please, please, please remember this. It's very easy to fall into the trap of feeling like you need to push down and get rid of all that tooth, but you don't. So keep it light, it will naturally flatten with your layers. And if it doesn't after the second go around, you just repeat again. Now again, remember you're not outlining, you're adding the detail in the shadow spots. And now we blend with grass green. Apple green. And spring green. And now you can bring your white through those very highlight points. Now don't forget, this technique you are learning here for the leaves can be applied to any leaf image. It's not just about what you're colouring here today. So after this lesson, grab out some of your other floral stamps and practice. Practice is how we grow. So it's like when you go to school and you learn a technique and the teacher gives you homework. The homework is actually where it's meant to sink in. So even though no one really likes homework, think of this as fun homework. You're doing something you really enjoy and you want to learn more about, and those little practices help you just improve every single time. Now we did talk about adding the few little touches of the rosy color there, that little bit of discoloration. Now depending on how complex the image is will depend on where I add that in. So if this was a really complex image and I wanted a really strong two-tone look, I would have done this right from the start and incorporated the two colors together so we could get that really seamless transition and keep it all smooth. However, I just want a few random little touches and pops of color through here to break it up. So I'm adding this now over the top. So this is a really, really easy way to do quick two-tone details. So I'm going to grab my henna pencil, so it's more like a burgundy sort of color, and I'm just randomly applying this 2 points in the leaves. Now I'm sticking to the edges and blending in toward the highlights. I'm not applying everywhere, so you want to be careful that you don't end up just outlining. And now the other thing is, you still want to apply lightly because we've flattened a lot of the tooth in our paper already. So when I add this over the top, it might look a little scratchy and see all the lines. That's just because I don't have any grip left in the paper to add this in. So you are seeing it basically as if it was if I laid it down on smooth paper. You just see all those little edges. So I do just want to apply softly so I can still blend it out. Once you've done that, I grab a little bit of nectar, which is a bit more of a peachy pinky color, and then I just go straight over the top where I added that last color, and I'm just bringing it out a little bit. And then the white, and all I'm doing is just coming over the very edge of the pinky colors, and you're just really, really lightly sort of morphing it into the green so it'll be seamless. And you can see it just gives you that really soft, light two-tone look. And you can go back and forth between the colors, add as much or as little as you like, or keep building up that color intensity until you're happy. But that is actually this chapter all complete. Now, remember, this is your first time trying this technique, and when we try new things, we can often have mistakes in areas we don't love. It's totally normal. Before looking at your work, I want you to do something really important, and that's change your perspective. When we're coloring, we color from about 10 or 20 centimeters away. We color so up close, focusing on every single little detail, every mistake, every single little aspect. But that's not actually how coloring is viewed. Think about whenever you're online, you see someone else's work. Do you sit so close and scrutinize looking for mistakes? No, you look at the whole thing, you appreciate it in entirety, how the techniques have come together. That's what we want to do here as well. So to help you change your perspective, what I would encourage you to do is hop up out of your chair, do some hand stretches, just open and close your hands a few times, make sure you're not getting any RSI from holding those pencils, neck gently from side to side, and even do a lap walking around the room just to loosen up. Then when you come back, hold your coloring out at arm's distance or prop it up against the wall and take a few steps back. You're changing that perspective, viewing it as a whole and seeing how it's coming together. Make sure you do those things so you actually get up and do your stretches. It helps so much rather than just holding it back and looking. So when you're looking at your whole piece, remember if there's areas you don't love, instead of saying I've done this wrong or it's not perfect, really don't like when people say that. Try and always avoid it, especially if you're sharing online as well. What I want you to do instead is look at your piece and say, any areas you don't love, think of the lesson here. Next time I'm going to do this to get this result. And see, all of a sudden you change negative into positive into constructive. It's your learning opportunity, and that's exactly what we're here to do today. So experiment, have fun with it. You're doing a great job. I'm really excited to see how you're going. Pop in and share your coloring after this step with us. Pop it in our Facebook group, pop it on Instagram, your blogs, any other group. You're welcome to share any way you like. All I love is that you please just mention that you're learning at Kid and Clouder so others can come and learn with us as well. I'd love if you'd mention what class it is. But you are working hard. You are challenging yourself. You're pushing yourself. That deserves to be celebrated. So again, give yourself a big pat on the back. You've done the most important thing to help you grow your coloring here today. Welcome to the markers portion of the video tutorial. Now you should have watched the start of this video where we go through all the art fundamentals and theories behind how we're going to color up this chapter. If you've skipped ahead, please do go back and watch. I know it's a little bit long, but it goes through a lot of really important things because coloring is not just about putting marker to paper. It's about understanding why we're actually doing it, which helps you make better, smarter, and more educated decisions to help you get the look that you really want. So please do just pop back, take a watch, and now we're going to get started. Now before we jump in, I'm going to show you a little clip here just running through all the marker blending basics. Now it's just a quick one to get you feeling a little bit more comfortable. So even if you are a class member and you've seen this before, I still recommend to watch again, do a little bit of a practice. It helps you just to get comfortable before you put your marker to the final image. Okay, now with markers, I'm using my Copics here today. Now it's important when using alcohol markers that you use a good bleed-proof cardstock. Now I'm using Express It blending card. There are a few other types available as well, which you can find on the website, kidandclouder.com. Click FAQs, then Coloring FAQs, then you'll see the papers section with suggestions there. Now the reason why we use a bleed-proof cardstock is it allows the ink to sit on the surface of the paper for longer rather than seeping through those fibers of the paper. This is what allows us to blend the colors together and allows us to work them a bit more. The reason why I like the Express It is I find it tends to hold more layers of ink for longer, allowing the ink to sort of sit on the surface for a bit longer. Now, if you're brand new to using markers, what I would suggest, if you have difficulty with any of the strokes here today, that you pop onto our website, again, kidandclouder.com, click Classrooms at the top of the page, and then scroll down to the free Markers 101 class. Now, this class runs through all of your marker fundamentals. Okay, so you can use any colors at all if you like. If you're going to color along with me, I'm just using my B12, 14, and 16. So a good blend to show highlight, midtone, and shadow. Now, when we do a coloring with our markers, the main stroke that we're going to use is feathering. So I don't really use circle blending in our classes, and that's because if you've learnt circle blending before, what happens is if you've got your dark, middle, and light colors and you're circling, you can actually muddy everything up. So when we work with lightsource, I tend to use more feathering method. Now, feathering is when we'll come parallel with the page. Now, I'm holding the marker like I just would normal writing. So it's a little bit on its side rather than straight up and down. Now, you may notice I'm holding the marker so it rests on my second last finger. A lot of people color with it on the last one. And when you color on the last one, what you'll notice here is I'm very close to the page. So as soon as I put my hand down, I'm sort of hitting the page already. Whereas if I've got on my second one here, when I come down to place the marker, I've got a bit more of a gap. My marker's sitting high from the page and I have a bit more control. Now, if you usually color like this, you may find that it just takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable in this one. You may find it doesn't work for you at all, and that's okay. But I have had a lot of feedback that it's helped with fine lines. So have a practice today, see how you go, and maybe something that helps. So when we do the feathering, we're going to come parallel with the page and we lift our wrist at the end of the stroke, and that gives me a nice fine finish to help with blending. I want to use the side of the marker so I get nice big broad coverage, and you can see I'm overlapping so I get again that broad coverage there. I'm trying not to have much individual stroke like this showing at the end. So you can see here I've got pretty good coverage and just lifting as I finish up. Then I grab my next lightest color, so this is B14 for me, and I start just back of where I've ended with that color. And then I just do the same thing. So I feather straight over the top and extend further out. And I keep going until I can't see the line between the colors any further. Now I can see, however, the line of where I started this color. So once I've finished this, I just go back real quick. One layer should get rid of that line. So the idea with markers is that you keep blending until the lines disappear, and that's what your bleed-proof cardstock helps with. So next color, B12, same thing, you just start back a little bit, building up, and remember, use the side of that marker, nice big broad strokes. Keep going until that line disappears. When it does, if you can see where you started the color, just go back one nice stroke over the top until you're happy with the blend through. And that's all there is to it. So you want to make sure we're not getting these little stubby sort of strokes here. If you are, use a bit more the side. And try and work quickly. I find when we work quickly and we're a little bit more carefree, it's a lot easier to blend with the markers. We're not as heavy-handed. We don't need to think it through every little step so much to get a nice. Okay, now let's get ready to go ahead and jump in using what we went through at the start of the video. So I'm going to start with my darkest color here, which is G28, and I'm going to apply this down the side of the stem, applying to the side that's further from the light. Now you can see I'm holding the marker nice and close to the nib, coming up on the point like we just went through in that starting video tutorial. Now even if your lines are thicker here, if you're using bullet tip markers or you're not 100% comfortable with fine lines, it is okay. The sole way you get better is simply practice. And I used to, even, at the start of the video just then, I just went through all those blending techniques. I used to just do practicing of fine lines all over the page like this. So you can even do that to start feeling comfortable before you even touch your marker to the page. But if your lines end up thicker than mine, it doesn't mean it's wrong by any means. So I really want you to try and move past that. And instead, I just want you to remind yourself that you're just here to practice. And every time you practice, it's going to get a little bit easier. And even if you don't end up with strong contrast or highlights today, it's something you can work on for next time. I'm going to bring this color out and around the bottom of the thorn. Generally, when something is horizontal like this, the light comes down from above, hits the top first, and the lower side is darker. And that's what we're indicating with this thorn there. The top part being lighter, bottom being darker. Now, I find it's easier to move my paper around. So you may find it a lot easier to move, and actually bringing your lines up along the edge or even coloring toward them can help as well. So if you find that you go out of the lines, move your paper so the bulk of your marker falls within. That way you're coloring toward the edge. But this is one reason why I really like the no lines images if you're a beginner, because if you come out of the lines here and you end up creating your own line, no one's going to tell where that outline was originally placed. So you can even make your own line. And what I can even show you here, this is another little tip. See that line? I can trace it, but trace it on the outside. And see, the bulk of my marker is falling away from that center point. It's falling along the outside of that line, and no one's going to be able to tell because my lines are so soft and light. That's a really, really good reason of why I recommend this no lines image when we're working with nature or animals. Typically, they're the two topics I'll recommend no lines for, because your line work can get a little bit finer. We do have a lot of texture to work with, and you can cheat the system a little bit. Then it helps you just get more comfortable. Coming along the bottom of the other thorn here as well, it's the side that's further down from the light. So let's just do those colors first and we'll work on blending them out. Now the next color I'm going to be using is YG67. So it's actually quite easy to blend the stem because it's a smaller area. So all I'm doing here is coming basically over the top and then just pulling in a little bit toward the highlight in the middle. Going along the thorn, blending up toward the top of it there. So the aim is to get lighter in toward that middle part. But to do your best at the same time. Now, if you're using bullet nibs and you're finding it hard to get control, take a look at our free Markers 101 class. That's really helpful because it goes through tips on specifically using your bullet tip markers. The actual ink works in the same way as what we're doing here now. You can get the fine lines, it just takes a little bit more practice. YG63 is next, straight over the top. You can see blending in. Now you may find with this color that you don't have a lot of white space left if you're new to using your markers. It's okay, again, it's just practice. It's really important to remember as well, the stem's not a main focal point. Sometimes I see people get so upset about a little area they don't love, and you think, I haven't even looked at that because the main focus here is this total other part of your image. So in this case, no one's going to be looking at the stem first and foremost. They're going to be looking at all of those beautiful petals. So even if your lines here are thicker or your shading may not be in all the same places, it's a secondary element. Your focus is on the primary element, in this case your rose. That's where your eye directly goes. So anything that's secondary is just helping to tell the story. And it's setting up the scene without really drawing your eye in. So these things in particular never have to be perfectly detailed. And the last color, YG03. So this is nice and light, and we're coming through now in that middle area, and you can see just blending it all together. Now we didn't really need to focus so much on blending techniques here because it's so small, it tends to just blend nicely together. But you can see I'm doing multiple strokes and it will just soften your colors in. So multiple strokes help things to blend smooth. But the actual blending itself was pretty quick and easy. I find though when I do one coat of color that sometimes the colors can become a little bit desaturated. And what I mean by that is when I use this YG03, if I come over some of the darker colors there, it can pull away some of that pigment, making the darker color look a little bit lighter. So this is all going to be personal and it will depend on how you feel you're happy with your final result. If you feel like that happens or you feel like it's not particularly well blended, you can repeat everything again to build up more depth. So you literally start, this is G28, you can start with the darkest color and just repeat these steps. And because you've already got that base layer of color down, it'll just come up even stronger the second time around and it will hold more, be a little easier to blend as well. Now a little bit of a shadow straight underneath. Now I haven't just left that as a line. You can see now I've started to flesh it out, adding in the cast shadow beneath the leaves. So we never really want cast shadows to just be lines. Fleshing them out will always give you a really nice shadowed look rather than just a line. And you can see there using my YG67 as I move through my colors and blending that out. Now if your markers are new and they feel really juicy, you want to avoid any dreaded blobs by uncapping both sides of the marker. So you'll be able to feel, if you've got a marker and you go, oh, the ink is coming out pretty fast here, you want to stop, uncap your marker, maybe even let it sit 30 seconds or so as well until you resume coloring with both caps off. This is just going to make sure that your work stays nice and safe. Typically happens with new markers, you just need to equalize the pressure just to prevent those drips. YG63 coming over the top and blending out that edge. and then the YG03 to finish, and this will bring all those colors together so it's nice and light and soft. And you can see the color is so much richer this second time around. So that is of course up to you. If you're happy with the depth, you don't ever need to repeat, but you'll find when you start doing larger areas and more complex blends, like when we do the rose petals, you're probably going to want to repeat that because it's going to hold a lot more and give you even more depth. Okay, let's come now into the leaves. So we did go through this theory at the start, so we can just jump in straight away. So I'm going to bring in the G28. Now remember, this little section here looking like it's curving over. So because that's in front, we come in with G28 and add our shadow around. So remember, cast shadow always falls on the object behind. So come around that top part. Now we can do the vein lines. Now again, you can do these as thick as you're comfortable with. If your lines end up super thick through here, a lot thicker than the artist line, that is absolutely okay. It's not going to impact your final result. I want you to focus more on blending, less on how thick or thin your strokes are, because it is just something that will come to you with time. Now the great thing about Power Poppy images is they already have these lines drawn in, so we can just trace over the top of what's there. Sometimes though, when you've got large gaps like this, you may choose to add in a few more lines. So you can even add your own now to start filling in the space. Now the outer edges, we want to be really careful that we're not outlining. So I'm going to add to the very depths of the shadows, like this high point here, just adding a touch where that curve is. And then along these outer edges, if you're comfy with fine lines only, I'm going to come around the little shape and add in a bit of form shadow. Now, if you're not comfy with fine lines, please just leave this little step out. This is something you can work towards building up. So you can see it's a lot finer. So again, always alter a tutorial to suit what you're comfortable with. But remember, you are here to practice, and practice is how you improve too. Okay, YG67 next, and let's start blending out. So I'm going to come straight over the top of where I laid the previous color. So starting in my cast shadow area. Now we did talk about at the start how we blend out the veins, and they always get lighter toward the tip. So I'm coming straight over the top of these vein lines and blending out toward the tip of the leaf. Now again, it's such a small area, so I don't need to really work hard on blending as such, but you can see I'm going over the previous color. I'm doing a few strokes, multiple layers are how we blend and build up smoothly. And then once I see that the colors have merged together nicely, I can move on to the next part. So it's just multiple soft light layers. I find as well working quickly will actually help you get more confident strokes, and it stops you from really pushing the marker down. Sometimes I find when people are really thinking about it, they're coming through and then pushing the marker through like this, and they're really pulling it around, and they'll notice how thick that is compared to if I've just done this. And even if it's wobbly, it's a lot thinner. So practice the thinner version, speed yourself up, work with a little bit of speed so you can really keep everything nice and light. YG63 is next, and we come again straight over the top. Now again, this area is small, but what I'm doing is I'm focusing on blending out the line of where that previous color has ended. So I'm not necessarily coming the whole way back, but just over where that last line is. And again, multiple strokes. Markers is no hard and fast rule about you must do this many strokes or you must blend this many times. The key is that you're layering to get it smooth. And as soon as it's smooth, that part's done. It's never going to be 100% smooth, like it's not digital coloring. So it's important to remember there's going to be imperfection. But you can see, as I color this, the lines disappear as you're building color on top of other colors. So it's just about layering until you go, that's fairly smooth, I'm going to move on. And the hard part is every time you color, that's going to be a little different as well. Because every time you color, you use a slightly different pressure, or different markers may be more juicy or more saturated than others. And there's a few different variables that will come into play. So It really just comes down to practice how you get comfortable with this technique. Now these side parts, if you're not comfy with your fine lines, just leave them out for now. All I want you to be doing is blending toward the edges. So you'll start blending out each of these vein lines like I've been doing, and you'll slowly start to close the gap. YG03 is my next color, so I'm going to come straight over the top. Now this is definitely coming higher here toward the top. I'm coming most of the way, but not the whole way up to that next line. Again, multiple strokes. You're just blending out until it looks fairly smooth. And because you're using multiple colors, it should blend out pretty closely without having very strong lines as well. The more colors you use doesn't actually mean it gets harder, it actually means your blending is easier. So if you don't understand how Copic theory works, they actually have their own numbering system and how to work with lightsource and everything like that. So I've actually got a big write-up on the website on how that works. You can head to kitandclouder.com, click Coloring FAQs, and then you can read all about the Copic numbering system. It actually really helps. It takes a few reads just to understand, but it'll help you really understand why we place colors where we do and how we build these up. YG11 is my next color, and this is the lightest one in the blend, and it's very soft. So I'm just coming over where the YG03 has ended now, and then blending this out to the remaining white area. The whole point of this color is it's very light, so it makes sure that we're not just left with strips of white on the paper in that highlight area. Instead, you're just softening the color out and coming over that remaining white, so it ends up really soft. That's one full layer of the blend. Now it maybe doesn't have as much depth as I'd like, and I'd see that the lines are not super well blended. So I'm going to repeat everything for extra depth. Now I'm actually pretty happy with how dark my shadow color is here, so I'm going to leave that one out, and I'm going to come in with YG67. Again, little things like this are always your call based on how you think your coloring is going. So if you want to come in and increase the shadow, you absolutely can. And that is actually called controlling the value of a color. Now, value is how light or dark a color blend is, and we control that by how much or how little of the lighter versus darker colors we use. So the more of the darker colors we use, less of the lighter colors equals a darker blend. And the reverse, a lighter blend will equal more of the lighter colors, less of the darker. But we still have light versus dark colors because we still want to show contrast to communicate the light source. YG63 is next, and you can come straight over the top and again extend a little further out. Multiple soft layers to blend as needed. I think this is the hardest thing when people start. They go, but how many layers? And do I come back over all the colors? The idea is you're blending out the line of the last color and then what needs it. So sometimes you can actually see when you lay down a color, you'll see the line of where your pen was put down. So you want to remove that. So you'll do an extra layer on that. But again, it's going to be different every time. So there's no hard and fast rule. But this is why having good bleed-proof cardstock, your marker paper, is so important, because you really want it to hold the layers of ink that you need. YG03 is next, straight over the top and extending a little further out. You can see definitely holding the color a lot better and stronger the second time around. And then YG11, you're just pulling that through to blend into the remaining highlight. And again, you can repeat as needed. Sometimes I even feel like I need to come back in again just to build up even more depth or if something hasn't blended nicely. If you didn't add these details on the end, your color will just blend out the whole way. And this is something you can aim to work toward as well. Remember, just because your coloring may look different in parts, it doesn't ever mean it's wrong. It just means that you're learning technique and you're building up that confidence and that repertoire of skills slowly to tackle all different things. Now in this part, we have overlapping elements. So we've actually got the petal of the rose, a leaf here and a leaf here, all overlapping within each other. So remember way back at the start of the video, we talked about that cast shadow. When an object is in front, it casts a shadow back on the object below or behind, showing the distance between. And that's what we want to incorporate here. We want to incorporate cast shadows so we can clearly see that distinction between the objects. So we know that the petal is sitting in front. Then we know by following the outline we can deduce what else is happening. So we follow the outline of this leaf around, coming around here, and then we've got an intersection at this point. So we want to find out what's happening at that intersection. This line stops. Then we have this line that comes from above and it comes straight over the top, but it continues on and around. So imagine that intersection. Where's this line going? It actually continues underneath around like this up to the top here. And because we know it continues underneath, we then know that this leaf is in front of this one. So this one is casting the shadow back. Remember, the shadow always falls on the object below or behind. So we grab our G28 and we add in our shadows. So just coming around the leaf that's in front. Now shadows, cast shadows never have to be super thin. I would rather these be thicker so you can really see that depth. So if yours are a lot thicker than mine now, absolutely okay. Please do not worry about that in the slightest. Going to come around that petal as well because the petal is in front. So would be adding that cast shadow back, same on this side too. We can even do the little one at the top here. Once you've done that, then you can work on your vein lines. We can just trace what the artist has drawn in, adding in your own details here. Now some of these veins have like a little prong on them that you can use to add a little bit more detail. Of course, all of these little things are your choices. You can add in some more vein lines as well to fill any space. And again, if you're comfy with the fine lines, add a little bit of detail on the edges here. So coming up and then around that front section. If you're not comfy with fine lines, just simply leave this part out. And you'll just extend your color through to the very edges. I like to do multiple leaves at once. Now, you don't have to work super fast with markers. You don't just want to walk away and leave it a day though. But you can do a section of colors. It's not going to dry out instantly. But if you feel like you may need to get up, you can just do one little bit at a time. Now we've already got the cast shadow around here, so doing these little bits between becomes a little bit redundant, except at the top here where the leaf sort of goes outside the line. So I just extended that through a little bit more. The little leaves on the sides here are a lot smaller. So again, just do what you're comfortable with. Even if these ones have the detail in the outline and this one doesn't, that's okay. But if you really want to practice those fine lines, you can add these in as well. Baby steps at a time is how you're going to grow it, but you definitely grow by trying. Let's do this other little one as well. And then we just blend out. So everything we've already been going through. YG67, practice blending those cast shadows. And blending out toward the tip of the leaf. Blending out these parts on the side if you've added them in. If you've not, you would just skip this step, obviously. So having a class where you repeat a technique like this is always really helpful, and even having months where you do similar images. So in our monthly class, you may do animals one month and then a few months later you may do them again. You may think, well, we just did fur not long ago. But it's a little sneaky trick of mine. I'm incorporating some new but some repetitive tasks. So you do practice and level up that skill. You get a little bit of time to go back over it. And that's how you're going to improve and get better and better. So don't ever become complacent. Try not to rush through. Bring yourself back to the present moment and be mindful. Watch the colors, the blending, everything else you're doing, so you can be patient, so you can enjoy the process, and you can focus on what you're doing here today to improve. YG63, YG63, work on blending out that cast shadow. Always blend out your cast shadows and don't just leave them as lines. It's really important too, otherwise they're not going to give you the depth that you need. They're all about creating depth. It is typically the single thing that most crafters leave out because they haven't had the experience to know what one is, and no one's at fault for that. You just simply haven't learned it. So it's easy to leave out what you don't know. So, and again, that's a big difference of why doing a class is important, because you don't know what you don't know. So trying to improve your skill when you don't actually know what that is to add in can be very difficult. So, but I always get asked, what do I need to do to increase depth? And that's it. Because usually most people get the basics of light source okay, and then they're going, it still doesn't look quite right, and it's typically because you don't have cast shadows. So make it part of your routine. Every time you pick up your markers, first thing to add in is your cast shadows. YG03 next. And again, really working on starting to blend these out. Now another thing with markers, when you're at the halfway point like this, see how it's like half kind of blended? It looks messy and it looks bad because it's purely incomplete. You're looking at something that you haven't yet finished. It looks messy, it looks like it's not blended, but we still have another color to go. The final color is where everything gets brought in. And we even still have other layers to go if we want to add more layers to blend it a bit smoother. When something's incomplete, it's always going to feel that way. It's going to feel a little bit not right. So it's really important that you aren't judging your work in any way. Trust the process, trust yourself in what you're doing, and just simply keep going. I see a lot of people put things aside because they aren't sure. Whereas if you just keep going and you at least finish, then you can give it all context, you can see how it's come together, and have a look at what you may change for next time. YG11 is next, coming over the top, and you're blending out to that final highlight area. Now again, that is only after one layer. You may find coming back and adding more will give you more depth, make it blend a little bit easier. So I can come in with YG67 and you're literally just repeating. When we do our classes, one thing that's really, really important is to try and practice mindfulness. Now, if you're part of our Facebook community where we all chat, you'll notice I bring this up a lot. Mindfulness is really important to help in managing stress, feelings of overwhelm and anxiety, and just helping you be present, feel a lot more balanced. The reason why I talk about this a lot with your classes is your classes are a mindfulness activity. Two types of activities you can do to relax. You've got mindless, things like just picking up your pencils and just coloring without instruction or anything like that. It's usually a mindless coloring. Watching your TV, mindless activity. Just sort of vegging out is counted as mindless. And it's still important because you're just resting. These activities here, doing a lesson or say working out or other activities like that where you are a bit more actively engaged, these are called mindful activities. And this is where you activate different parts of your brain to be challenged and you actually occupy your mind. So when you occupy your mind, you're actually taking more of a break from stresses around you because you're actually stopping your mind from thinking and processing and going over and having that anxiety and worry that comes with everyday life. So this is what actually gives you a little bit of a mental break and relax and recharge. This is why it's really important. I always see people say, oh, things are so busy right now, I don't have time to do my classes. This is why it's crucial to make time, because it's about self-care. It's got nothing to do with the actual coloring, really. It's just the activity, but it's actually to do with giving yourself an important mental break to recharge, to feel more balanced and less stressed. NYG11. Now, another little tip that I wanted to go through is you can add a white pencil to your stash to help you with fine details. So you can see we've already got so much depth. We don't need to add any pencil in to create depth. It's all there. But in your highlights, sometimes, and especially if you're a little bit more heavy-handed, we can lose highlights. So adding in just really softly a tiny little bit of white can really just bring back any highlights that you may have lost. Now, I much prefer to use a white pencil than a white gel pen because you can see it's a lot softer. And this is a Prismacolor pencil that I'm using. I find they work really nice over your markers. It's not a lot that I'm adding, but it's just bringing it in that very highlight area, and you can see the difference, that little pop there. Even in some of these smaller leaves as well, it will help you just to create the sectioning a little stronger. But of course, that step's optional, just depending on if you're happy with the level of depth you have. If you're a little bit heavy-handed, it can just help bring up that vibrancy again. Now, we did talk at the start of the video about adding a little bit of a two-tone finish. Now, this is a really quick and easy way to add it. It works really well when you only want just a light two-tone rather than blending one color into another. So we're going to layer up colors. It works best with using a really light color over the lighter areas in the color you've just done. So this is RB42, it's like a light pinky peachy color, and all I'm going to do is just feather this over some of my highlight areas. Coming over the shadow areas, you won't see it as much, but if I stick this lighter color in my lighter areas, it will definitely be visible. Now I'm just adding it randomly. You want to make sure to avoid any outlining because then it will look too uniform. It should look nice and natural. You can even bring a little bit through the stem. Now where it's blended out, if you feel like you've got any lines, you can just bring YG11 over where the color has ended. And all that will do is it'll help bridge that peachy color in with the greens a little bit more. Even if you overlap the colors a touch as well, it's going to just soften down any edges. And you can see that gives you a really pretty soft two-tone look. But that is actually this chapter all complete. Now remember, this is your first time trying this technique, and when we try new things, we can often have mistakes in areas we don't love. It's totally normal. Before looking at your work, I want you to do something really important, and that's change your perspective. When we're coloring, we color from about 10 or 20 centimeters away. We color so up close, focusing on every single little detail, every mistake, every single little aspect. But that's not actually how coloring is viewed. Think about whenever you're online, you see someone else's work. Do you sit so close and scrutinize looking for mistakes? No, you look at the whole thing. You appreciate it in entirety, how the techniques have come together. That's what we want to do here as well. So to help you change your perspective, what I would encourage you to do is hop up out of your chair, do some hand stretches, just open and close your hands a few times. Make sure you're not getting any RSI from holding those pencils. Neck gently from side to side, and even do a lap walking around the room just to loosen up. Then when you come back, hold your colouring out at arm's distance or prop it up against the wall and take a few steps back. You're changing that perspective, viewing it as a whole and seeing how it's coming together. Make sure you do those things so you actually get up and do your stretches. It helps so much rather than just holding it back and looking. So when you're looking at your whole piece, remember if there's areas you don't love, instead of saying I've done this wrong or it's not perfect, really don't like when people say that. Try and always avoid it, especially if you're sharing online as well. What I want you to do instead is look at your piece and say, any areas you don't love, think of the lesson here. Next time I'm going to do this to get this result. And see, all of a sudden you change negative into positive into constructive. It's your learning opportunity, and that's exactly what we're here to do today. So experiment, have fun with it. You're doing a great job. I'm really excited to see how you're going. Pop in and share your coloring after this step with us. Pop it in our Facebook group, pop it on Instagram, your blogs, any other group. You're welcome to share any way you like. All I love is that you please just mention that you're learning at Kit & Clouder so others can come and learn with us as well. I'd love if you mention what class it is. But you are working hard. You are challenging yourself. You're pushing yourself. That deserves to be celebrated. So again, give yourself a big pat on the back. You've done the most important thing to help you grow your coloring here today. Welcome to chapter 2 of the video tutorial. Now we're going to go ahead and start colouring up the rose petals. Now the main thing that we want to think about when we're colouring up the rose petals is going to be the light source, and in particular your cast shadows. Because you have so many overlapping petals, if we don't consider cast shadows, it becomes really difficult for your eye to discern which petal is which, what's sitting in front, what's sitting behind, and those actual levels that are taking place. The cast shadows are these darker parts in here, sitting on the parts of the petals that are further back to help to show that overlapping sense. So remember, if at any time you get stuck with cast shadows, this is my little trick. So I always just recommend grab a pen or a pencil, pop it over your hand like this, and you can see the object that's in front or above has cast a shadow onto the object below or behind. The closer they are together, the darker and harder that shadow is, and the further apart they get, the more soft and dispersed that shadow becomes. So always shadow on the object below. That's your big thing you need to remember, because what's above is making the shadow happen beneath it. So when we look at your petals, it's the same thing. You can pick any petal to start with. So say we pick this one here, and we follow along the outline to find out what's happening. So I can follow along here. Now you can see we get an intersection at this point. There's a line coming out from it. So what happens is we want to think about what's actually going on there. This line keeps going. It hits that intersection point and it keeps continuing around unobstructed. But it has obstructed this line. So if we want to peel it back and pretend like we lifted up that petal, we'd know that this line would continue around underneath to where it joins in. So because this line is unobstructed here, it makes it look like this particular petal is sitting in front of this one. So because this is in front, where does that shadow go? It goes on the petal behind, and you can see right here this nice big dark shadow coming around here on that petal that's behind to show that distance between the two. And then it's just the same thing, you just tackle each one the same way. So we continue to follow this, another intersection point, but this line remains unobstructed as it goes around until this point. So another cast shadow around. Now at this point, we lose the edge of that petal. It goes underneath. So we've got this one now, which comes through, and that's sitting over the top. So the shadow comes beneath that top petal. Same on this side. This whole section here is all sitting in front of that petal. So your darker color now comes in through here. So again, cast shadows and understanding things like light source just takes time. It's not all going to happen and make full sense to you in one lesson. But the more you do it, the more we go over it in different classes and different lessons and on different topics, the more it is going to sink in, and it'll be easier for you to retain the information and understand it. When we get coloring as well, it'll start to make a little bit more sense too, because you'll actually be doing it rather than just listening to me talk about it. Now let's keep going on the theory behind the petals. So another important thing we want to keep in mind is your form shadow. So remember, the form shadow is when the object itself is curving around away from the light. Now a really good rule of thumb with flowers, imagine you have a center point and then all the petals are coming in to that center point the whole way around the flower. As they come in, the petal usually sits up the top and then it will curve into that center point. So they actually come out curving rather than straight. So because they're curving up, the darkest point is actually going to be where it comes in and meets the center. And as it gets up toward us, that's where it starts to get lighter, where that light is coming down and hitting that surface. So you can see that we've achieved this through these petals as well. So we've got the deep dark cast shadow, always strongest the closer it is to the object above. And then as that softens out, we actually see the form shadow, where this petal is curving down and getting less light. The part that's the lightest, you can see running through the top middle of the petal. That's where it's popping up. Now you'll notice on the edge though, we get a little bit darker again. Not as dark as the cast shadow, but a little bit darker compared to this highlight. So imagine it like it's popping up towards you, and then on the edge, it starts to curve back down. So you've got like a little raised up bit, and then you're seeing that edge sort of taper off. And because that's tapering off away from the light, it ends up a little bit darker. So you can actually see the curve and movement happening. So highest points are going to be the lightest, areas like this where you want it to look like it's really up high coming out towards your face. Then these parts here, form shadows, curving back down and away from your face from the light, and then cast shadows coming behind any objects in front. So you're still incorporating all that light source we went through way back at the start of the lesson. And that's what gives you the movement in the petals rather than just looking like straight sections. I think that's what most people do when they tackle flowers. They get these shadows all good, where it's coming in toward the middle, but we're not really getting that beautiful rounded look because we just are blending out to the edges. So it's taking it that next step, looking at how we actually start using that light source knowledge to create movement as well. Now in terms of texture, we do have a little bit of texture here, and you can see it's not just a plain smooth blend. Typically roses have very little texture lines on them, or even little veins that you can see, and so it actually isn't just 100% smooth. I've tried to incorporate that with both mediums here today, and I'll go over that in each specific part of the tutorial. But I do want you to start thinking about things like texture. Now this is actually called materiality. Now the materiality of the object is all the different things that you can think of that make up what that object looks like. So things like texture, color, pattern. Is it shiny? Is it matte? Is it rough on the surface? All these little things help to create the materiality of what that object is actually like, how we identify it. And whenever you go to color something, before you even pick up your markers or pencils, I want you to start thinking about that materiality. And a lot of you know, but my degree before I ever got into coloring was actually in architecture. And we used to do this as an exercise when I was at university. So you'd actually get a material and you'd actually write down all the components of the materiality that you can think of. So for example, you'd get timber and you'd write down all the colors, the patterns, everything that you think of that you associate with timber, because it helps you think about not only how we see and understand that material, but how we use it as well. So in design, obviously understanding the nature of the material would help you design better with the capability of it. But in coloring, understanding the materiality of the object can help you make better decisions to communicate what you're coloring. So say we were coloring timber, rather than just picking up, say, brown markers or pencils and going for it, if you actually even make a list or really think about it before you even pick up the markers or pencils, you can go, okay, maybe I want some texture grain running through it so I can look a little bit more like timber. and maybe it has a shiny polyurethane coating. So all of a sudden you've got this coating on top, which is going to have a really nice bright highlight so you can show that shine. And you start thinking of little ways that you can adjust the material to suit the look you want. So it is getting a little bit more advanced. If you're brand new to coloring and you're just still understanding light source, you may be thinking, well, I'm not up to that level yet. And that's okay, because every time we go through a class, I'm kind of doing that thinking of the materiality for you by looking at things like that texture and that color theory now. And that's why the more you do, the easier it does get. But when you come to your own projects, think about these little things and tips that I'm giving you, because even though it can feel like a lot of steps, these are actually the things that level you up. And again, you're doing the class here today or any of our classes at Kit and Clouder because you actually want to level up your own personal coloring. So little practices like this can really, really help make a big difference. Think about what you're actually coloring. Don't just pick up the markers and pencils and just go for it. Think about what you want to communicate, what you want to portray, and let that guide your choices. Now, the only other thing in terms of movement here that we can really talk about is you'll notice on some of the smaller petals, like this one through here, in particular, we've got like an undulating motion that's happening. So rather than the petal just looking straight the whole way across, it actually looks like you've got peaks and valleys. So we actually do that by controlling how much or how little of the darker colors are used when we do the shading. So if I just wanted it to look smooth, I would get my darker color and just color the whole thing with my strokes at the same length, and I wouldn't get any variation. But what I've actually done is I look at the outline of the petal here, and any parts that are curving up in toward the center of the flower, I've actually made the darker color a little longer. So you can actually see that comes all the way up to here, whereas down here it's really quite small. So you've got these levels now happening. What that does is where we've got the parts curving up, adding the darker color will make it look like it's like a crease. It's like an indent down. And a good way you can think about this, and a good way to remember it, is when you've got the outline and you see those parts curving up, imagine them being pulled in. So they're being pulled and they create these little creases because you're pulling that material. And that's why you're adding that darker color in there, to create those crease or valley areas. The areas that are opposite, extending down away from the center, you can see are a lot lighter. And that's creating that undulating surface, so the petal doesn't just look smooth. We'll touch on that as we do the coloring as well, but that's a really good amount of theory to start thinking about. This technique is also the same way we tackle folds in a dress. When you have those lines extending in toward the middle, pull them up. That's where your folds are coming from, that tension that's happening there. So again, you can see here a lot of the theories overlap for different objects, and you're starting to learn and understand them and how you can incorporate them into other projects. Okay, I think it's ready to go and get coloring now. So I'm going to jump in with pencils first, and if you're using markers, you can feel free to fast forward ahead to the markers component of the video. Alrighty, let's get ready to jump in with our pencils. Now, what I'm going to do first is what I talked about in the leaf lesson. I'm actually going to do all of my cast shadows. Because that's an area that is often missed, it's always a great thing to do first. That way you're not going to accidentally forget this step. It's your first thing that I want you to start drilling into your mind every time you color any image, especially outside of class. Cast shadows first, that's step one. So we just went through all of that theory. If you didn't watch the start of this chapter, please go back and watch the start, because I went through a lot of information about how we're going to tackle coloring the petals. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump in. Now this color is my Tuscan Red. I'm not going to use this as a form shadow color. I'm purely using it for cast shadows. So I'm going to pick a point to start and start adding in those cast shadows behind the petals that are in front. Now again, remember with your pencils, it's all about taking your time and going nice and soft so you can control the blend. We are using quite a lot of colors here in the rose to create the blending. So we want to make sure we've got enough room to build and layer everything here. And you can see the cast shadows are coming from the objects that are in front or above. I'm coming around them and laying in these cast shadows on the parts that are below. So the way I'm going to tackle this with my pencils is I'm actually going to just color this normally first. Just a normal basic blend, and I'm not even going to think about texture. But I'm going to come back and I'm going to add more texture as I do the layers. So this first step, really nice and easy. I don't really want you to think about anything except for light source. You can see as well though, I am adding a little bit of depth. It's not just the finest line I can do. Adding depth will help to really show the distance between the objects as well. Okay, coming around, you can see here we've got the little lip. That's like on the leaf that we did at the start. So imagine this as like the face of the petal, and then it comes and it curves back in on itself like this. And when you have that top layer, it casts a shadow underneath. So the same here too, we're just going to add a nice cast shadow straight beneath that layer. And you can add a bit of a cast shadow at the base as well. This big petal here is a little different. So what I'm going to do here, you can see it's very close at this point, and then it sort of fans out, and there's actually quite a large gap between this part and this part. And you can see that because the artist has drawn it in. It's very light, but there are some lines here where you can see she started to curve that petal, and it indicates that that's closer together, and that's where you've sort of got that fanning out action happening. So at this point here where those lines occur, I'm actually going to amplify the size of that cast shadow so I can really see the distance between. But over here, I'll just keep it really minimal and soft. So the amount of the colors you use in the direction can influence how those petals really look as well. And it shows also the larger the shadow is, typically the further back it is, but don't forget it gets softer the further out it gets. Now over here on this edge, we can actually see that that wraps back on itself as well. So where that little part's behind, I just go and add a little bit on the edge. And I'm even going to add a little bit to the top here because this part of this petal is really lowered, so I'm adding a little bit just there. This part is very far behind, both this petal and this petal. So in that little crease there, where it's quite far back, I'll add quite a bit of this darker color, again to show that it is in a lot of shadow. And then the same on this little petal, I'm going to add a little bit here. We've sort of got that fanning out sort of around the edge, so the petal's almost curving back on itself. And the same in this little corner as well. Okay, coming into the center points, a lot of petals now as we get in here. Now this side, so again we've got this top lip, and it's almost like that sort of that sort of shape there. But then as it turns around, we're seeing it a little bit different. All of a sudden, we're seeing the inside of this petal. So you've got that top part that's rounding over, and now here you can see inside. So we actually grab the darkest color and we can trace around that curve and fill in some of that space below. So we're adding in a little bit of shading here to show that you're sort of looking down and in, and that slant is not getting a lot of light. So you think of this like a top section, and then this here where it gets darker is like a direction change, and you're coming straight down the wall. Few little tight petals in here. I'm just taking my time to do the little shadow so you can clearly see the separation between the petals. And again, don't just keep your shading as lines. Add that little bit of thickness as well. Okay, so that's the darker color all done. Now you can take a look, go back and flesh out any lines that you may have. So if you've got any really little areas, add a little bit of thickness and make sure you fuzzy up any edges so the color ends softly. I'm pretty happy with mine, so I'm probably just going to leave it here. And now we'll move on to the next color. And in the next color, we can start to add a bit more of the form shadow. So we'll really start to flesh out these colors more and start giving these petals shape. So the next color I'm going to be using is Crimson Lake. And with this color, we come straight over the top of what we've just done, but now we really start to extend in. So areas like this here, I'm coming up, really fleshing that out. Again, you don't need to worry about texture in these starting steps. Just worry about getting that light source down, getting the color in, and then we'll add texture shortly. Try to use each color equally too. That'll give you the most cohesive look. And just really nice and soft. So let's actually start by blending out all of the cast shadows, and then we can come back and add a little bit more detail. Because that way it's nice and easy. You're breaking this down again into sections. So blending out cast shadows first, and then we'll add more detail in. Now as you come to the side, I want this to look like we have a little lip. Again, like this sort of thing where it's rounded or a little bit higher. So I'm going to leave a gap from that edge, and I'm creating a little ledge type shape. And then we will blend out toward that section. Same on this little side, I'm going to create a little ledge here. So I'm going to leave a gap and we'll fill it in with a lighter color, and the darker color is just going to come around the side and toward the middle. Now I'm just going to add a touch more detail with this darker color, just in some of the edges. So remember, the edges curving away from the light can pick up a little bit of the darker color, but I'm not going to outline the petals, and I'm not going to add much of this color. I'm going to do it mainly with the next one, the midtone, because I do want it to look softer than these form shadows that I've just done. So with this color, I'm going to come to this outer edge here. We're going to make this middle part look raised up, and then I want it to look like it's directly changing directions and falling away. So at this edge here, I'm just going to add a little bit of the darker color. You can see a line, and then it tapers off like a triangular sort of shape. And the same in this little corner as well. So this is just keeping these two spots as peaks and the two triangular shading areas curving away. And I'm just going to do a little bit just in that little section there. In this lower part, the same thing, creating that little triangular shape. Coming through the middle a little bit here. And then the same on the edge. On this little edge over here, this one's really curving right back. So definitely adding this darker color down here, because I do want to show that that's a lot further back from the light. And then a few little details in here where you've got that curve extending in like we talked about before. Just pulling that down a little bit so you can get that movement. And then everything else, actually one more little bit. This little petal here, it's almost like a cone shape in the middle. But what I want this to look like, I want this to look like it's popping up, and then it's got a bit of an indent in. So it's like up and then in and then back up. So it's like a little neck area. So I'm just going to leave a gap from the edge and just do some really soft shading through what would be that neck sort of area. And that way I've created that undulation there, because where I've added that color, that's where it's stepping back from us. And I might just add a little touch just along the top here as well, but not a lot. And then that is actually that step all done. So I'm now going to swap into the next color, which is going to be crimson red, and we'll continue to blend out. So all nice and easy in these initial steps. It's just really light. You're getting control over the color blend and control over the light source. We've got a lot of layers to really do here in the petals though. So no judging at this early on stage. It's going to look a little bit like nothing, because you really need to go ahead and complete it to see how everything's going to work together. And now you can start blending from these outer edges as well in towards your highlight. So we're trying not to meet what's happening on this edge versus what's happening on the other side. So we definitely want your highlight to be lighter and brighter. We still have a lot of other colors to use too, so we want to make sure we're not bringing these too far out. We do have room for the other colors in the blend. Coming in a little bit on the outer edge. Now remember, the longer your strokes get, it's going to look like a crease or indent. To keep it smooth, you can keep everything the same length, but a bit of variation in some longer areas will break it up and create that movement for you. Come along the top, same thing, so you can extend some of these lines a little further down. Use the outline of the flower as a guide. where you've got those parts that have been pulled in. Now on the side of this one here, I'm going to create a little bit of a lip as well. So bringing this color now around the edge. A little bit of an edge and lip here as well, so the side here we want it to look like it's raised up, so it's going to get a little lighter. I'm going to leave these two petals. These are my very top ones and I want them to be even lighter. So I'm just going to leave them for the time being. That way it doesn't get confusing. Alright, when you're finished with that color, the next one is going to be carmine red. And you're just repeating. So really once you've done that first step, that's the hardest. The rest is just blending out what you've already laid down. Now with this color, I'm still trying not to meet what's happening on the other side, leaving the white highlight in between. We've got one more color and then the white left. So we're definitely closing the space on the petals, but we've definitely still got space left. blush pink is next. Now, coming over just where the last color has ended, you don't need to really bring this back the whole way to the shadow area. And again, you're blending this in a little further toward the highlight. It's not going to cover the whole area, but you are covering most of the remaining space now. So actually giving color to the petals. Any little edges like this here where there's nothing, just pull it around lightly so you can create a little bit of form. Because this color is so much lighter, it's going to avoid that outlined look anyway, but you don't want just half the petal that doesn't look shaded in. Again, remember the steps are really, really rough. It's meant to look that way. We're just getting color and light source down. Then we'll come back, add more depth, flatten out the tooth, and start to create texture too. But it's totally normal for this step to really feel quite messy. It's just helping us to really work just in sections at a time, rather than having to think about texture, detail, lighting, and everything right from step one. This sort of technique works best when you're working with organic things like florals and nature, because you generally have pretty complex color blends. So you can see here we've incorporated quite a few different pinks and variations of reds to create this blend. So we need to really be able to layer them to control the output of color. Now the reason why I use so many colors is not to help you necessarily get from dark to light easy with smooth transitions. It's actually for tone of color. So we're changing the tone a few times here. You can see if you were just to do a little swatch of each color we've used, they're all quite different, even when you get up to those darker reds. You've got some reds with slightly different tones as well. And then layering these on top, you're giving yourself complex blends that change as you go from your shadow down through your midtone and into your highlight, rather than just saying the exact same tone the whole way through. It just adds a little bit more interest, especially as the petals here are your show-stopping piece. Okay, next up is your white pencil. Use this now by starting in the white area and you just coming back and over where the pink has ended. I'm not bringing it the whole way into the shadow area, but I'm just focusing on just starting to blend out the pink with the white of the paper so you can get those smooth transitions. And you can see already that one petal looks more complete because of that. Starting to blend it all out. The reason why I start in the white area is it helps this highlight to remain clean. You're not pushing the pinks into it, you're pushing the color out and away from it. Again, make sure you're not using too much pressure in this step as well. The idea is not to flatten all the tooth, the idea is to start getting the transition smooth between highlight and color. We need to have those white speckles, we must have them. A lot of people fall into the trap of, oh, I don't like them because they look messy, so I need to really flatten and get rid of them. The tooth is your workable surface, so having that left over means you actually have more room to layer, to play, to create depth. It just simply means that you've got more room to build because the paper is going to hold it. As soon as that becomes too flat and you lose the tooth, it's very, very hard to build up and get control. So if you're using a really smooth paper, you'll notice this as we do all of the layers on top, that you may be able to see some of the lines between the colors, or you may find you're not able to get the same level of depth that I'm going to eventually get. And it's not what you're doing at all, it's actually your paper. So that's really, really important to remember, because I do get people sometimes complain about using paper with a tooth because they're not maybe quite getting it and they're not really quite getting it flat and feeling happy with the result. And it's just because they're still learning how to use it, and not to rush through the steps either. You don't need to rush and get it all flat. Take your time. Pencils is patience. And if you're not a patient person, you're sitting there like, oh my gosh, that is not me, this is a lesson for you then. Don't shy away from the things that are a little trickier, because working on things like patience, it's not only making you better at coloring, but it's helping you become a better you as well. It's something we can all work on. I know I can definitely work on things like patience. So having these little cues and things to slow yourself down, to be in the moment, these things are so helpful. And you'll find the more you do this, the more you travel along with your classes where we talk about these sort of things, you'll start to incorporate that in your daily life as well. And I've had a lot of people actually tell me that it is helping them, it's calming them. They feel more relaxed, feel more mindful, just doing other activities now as well. So that is step 1. You can see I've left the very highest petals all uncolored at this point. I want them to be even lighter than these other ones, so we can really see they are the topmost petals. Now what I'm going to do, I obviously need more depth there. I need to flatten that tooth down, and I want to start incorporating texture. So I'm going to sharpen up my pencils, and I'm going to repeat everything but with a little bit of variation. Okay, so let's start with Tuscan Red. Now the stroke I'm going to be doing is a little different. I'll just show you down the side. What I'm going to be doing now, instead of just circle blending or just shading, I'm going to always be working linear. So the strokes are always going to go in the one direction like this. And I'm going to aim to very lightly build up singular strokes and lines. Now, as I do more and more of them, I'll get more control over the shape of the line. And at the very top, I'm going to aim to start separating a little bit. Leaving gaps between strokes like that, just really subtle, is going to help you to get a little bit more texture. So just working in strokes rather than in shading. So let's have a look at that now. So cast shadows first though. You can always just draw these in as a line. It keeps it nice and easy. Now remember, with pencils, the later layers don't have more pressure, but what they do have are smaller strokes. So just take your time a little bit more. Then as you flesh those out, because you never just leave it as a line, now we come through and we do these little linear strokes, building these up in the shadow areas. And you're just building that up where you laid it in the previous step. So it's nothing super fancy, it's just really coming on top of what you've already done. Just keep the pressure light, that's your key. Relax that grip. Cast shadows always first. In any areas that you don't need a lot of texture, like this is the side of this petal, so I'm not really giving it that linear stroke. So I just blend that out like normal smooth little circles, and then as I come up from the base, this is where I'm going to add the linear lines for that little tiny hint of texture. We don't want it to be very strong, so what you will notice is that my lines don't have big gaps between them, they're very close together. If I was to have big gaps between, it's going to start looking very textured like hair, whereas this is a really subtle texture. Now, if you ever want any areas to look like you have a really strong sort of crease point and a high point here, what you can do is you can extend two lines a little longer and taper the shading out either side. So just like this here. And what this will do is I come in with the other colors and extend that through, that'll create a little raised ridge. So some flowers have that in, some don't, but I'll show you how to do it so you can add it in whenever you like as well. Again, this first sort of layer here with the darkest color, this is just shadows only, so you're not getting a lot of texture or anything really happening. It's when you come in with the other layers that you'll see a bit more. Because we don't use a lot of the very darkest color. That's in the very, very creases and depths of your flower. Right, next color in the blend, Crimson Lake, and you're just doing the same thing. Now though, we're extending our strokes up a little bit higher, and you can see here, as we start to get lighter, we can focus more on that linear look. Okay, now with this color, don't forget you're going to add in some of the details from the other side as well. So adding in some of these shadows as the petal curves back. And you can see that the little longer parts are going to help us create like those little creases. And we did talk about creating one over here as well. So you can see I'm extending those lines further, and as I do that, we're starting to create that little raised ridge. Use those little indents in the outline to create the shading where it's curving in toward the middle of the flower. So don't just come through and start outlining. You can see different heights for your strokes as well are going to give you more natural variation. So you don't need everything to end at that same level, because then you'll get bands of color too. So break it up with different length strokes. Just doing a little bit on this side where it starts to curve in as well. Okay, next color, crimson red. So you're just working down from dark to light here. Each color getting gradually lighter, maybe skipping through different color tones as you go too. So you're blending toward your highlight. Carmine red is the next color, and you're just doing the same thing. So it does tend to get a little bit repetitive as you get down through the steps. But again, try to focus on being in the moment. Don't rush through these steps. Focus on color, texture, where you're placing the color too. Don't just place down a stroke without thinking about it. Be in this present moment and enjoy the time that you're taking for you right now. Repetition is how you improve. So if you stay switched on during these steps, then you're actually going to think more about it to get better and better at your coloring. Now you don't need to be flattening all the tooth just yet as well. I'm going to show you a trick for that shortly. Just focus on keeping that pressure soft. You should never be using your pencil so hard your hands hurt. If this is the case, it's just way too hard. Loosen that grip up. Don't try and rush pressing it all flat. And then my next color, blush pink. Now this color is the lightest apart from white, so now you're basically going to bring this color all over, but I'm focusing on really leaving the gaps between the strokes with this one. I'm not bringing this color the whole way back to the very shadow area as well. I'm keeping it only over where the last color has sort of ended. That way I'm not losing my shadow. And by leaving the gaps between, it'll help to keep the highlight open. You can come through and add that white to brighten it all as well. Okay, now your white pencil, bring this through the very highlight only. You're not bringing that down to any shadow areas. Just little strokes. And then we're going to show you a little trick to further blend. Because after this step, I personally feel like I really need one more layer. But what I'm going to do, instead of coming in again, I'm going to use my blender pencil to help me push the last of this pigment flat. Now, if you don't have a blender pencil, all you need to do is just simply repeat again. There's absolutely no problems with that. You'll bring the color up really nice and strong and vibrant. And again, you'll be able to work on that texture still as well. But the blender, again, it's like a little bit of that cheat to help you get there a little bit quicker. Again, I don't use that blender pencil a lot for coloring. I only really use it when I want texture, so I wouldn't be using this on, like, say, a character's face or anything like that, or her outfit. But on something like the rose where I want a little bit of natural texture, it's really going to help me just enhance that. So I grab my blender pencil, and remember the blender pencil is like pushing the pigment. It's not adding anything that's not already there. So you have to make sure you've got enough pigment down on the page. And I start in the shadow and I just blend out toward the highlight, and I'm blending in those linear strokes. Then I'll come back from the other side where I've got that darker color and I'll blend this toward the highlight. So you're always blending toward that highlight point. That'll keep my highlight. Now with the blender, you can blend from highlight out or from shadow in. Think about where you want to push the pigments. If you want the highlight lighter, you would push the dark away from it. We actually want to extend this all in together and get it really nice and softly blended because we don't want a huge amount of contrast. Petals on flowers aren't usually super shiny, but they have a really pretty sheen. So we still want contrast between light and shade, but I don't want like white highlights. White highlights indicate a high shine like a metal. But soft highlights, so you can see here that we've got a pink as the highlight versus the red as the shadow. That still shows our light source. It still shows all the movement and everything really nicely. But by blending from the shadow toward the highlight, it's just allowing me to push those colors in toward each other. It softens the contrast a little bit, so it's not so sharp. You're just pushing that pigment around, keeping your strokes linear so you're not muddying up the texture that you created. Remember, a sharp pencil will always give you the most control as well. So if at any point you feel like you're not getting that control over your strokes, just give this pencil a quick turn in the sharpener and it will really help. Now when you use the blender pencil as well, you'll notice that I still did 2 layers of color before I used it. That's because you need to have enough pigment on the page to actually push around before you come in and apply it. If I was really light-handed and then grabbed my blender pencil, I'm not really going to have a lot to push. And that can result in really light colors, and it can feel really scratchy as you're blending. So you basically want the color depth to the point as how strong you want the finished result to be. And then the blender will just sort of push to smooth, rather than thinking that your blender is actually going to build up depth. So always get it to the level you want before actually coming in and using it. And that's the same if you use solvents. Same thing, Gamsol, odorless mineral spirits. You need to actually build the color up in the exact same way we already have here today, and then you come in and use it as a last layer like I am now instead of the blender pencil. So you should already be trying to get that depth. I personally don't love solvents. It's more of like a crafter thing that crafters have jumped on to get you easy blending. But it breaks down the pigment in like a paint-like surface, so it's a bit more like a marker finish. I don't love doing that. Typically artists use it for big backgrounds and getting them all nice and smooth, which is a really nice way to quickly cover large amounts of area. But when you're working in small areas like this, you do lose a bit of control and color depth and vibrancy. So you'll notice a lot of the Gamsol work that gets done all over. It's still beautiful, but you typically sacrifice things like detail and depth. So this is always going to give you more control. But if that's what you prefer, if it's a look that you love, by all means, go for it. The tutorials that you do here will be exactly the same. You just add your solvent as a final layer, like I'm doing here with my blender pencil. So everything else is still the same: light source, color depth, how many layers you do, and then just when it's almost ready to be blended, you've got the color depth, how vibrant you like, that's when you come in and use the solvents just to flatten it all out. See how different that looks after using that? You've really come in and really just taken the edge off, and it amplifies that texture. So again, if you really want real smooth finishes, using solvents or using your pencils, not the blender pencil, is not the best method, because it's going to enhance textures. It's pushing around what's already there. So always using the pencils themselves will give you the smoothest look. But that's really effective on our floral here, because it's amped up the texture, it's pushed the color, and it's given us that effect. Now we're almost finished. We just have these petals that are lighter. So what I'm going to do to make the colors look lighter, I'm just leaving off the darker colors in the blend. So I'm still using the same colors, but I'm controlling the value of the blend. So value, remember, is how light or dark the color blend is, by just controlling which colors I use, leaving out the darker ones and keeping only the lighter ones in here. So carmine red, we still need contrast, so we still need to show light and shade, so I'm still using more than one color. So carmine red though, I'm just going to apply softly through these smaller petals, and you can see I'm adding toward the bottom of the petal, but I'm leaving a gap top and bottom. I'm not just coming through and coloring it all in. And I'm just working with the shape of the petal there. Now on these larger petals, we can add in a little bit more detail. So now I like to come from the base, because the petal is curving up and over, so the part that's rounding away from the light is the back. So coming through and adding a little bit of shading with this color straight over the top, and working in those linear lines. From the other side, use the indents that we talked about. So remember, when it's extending up, think of it being pulled. So we add in those colors through there, creating the detail and movement. Same on this other big one, so let's add our shading from the back where it's curving around. And then up from this front here where you've got the parts that are being pulled in, adding that little bit of detail. Starting to blend out, blush pink is next, and we'll come straight over the top of where I applied this color in the smaller petals. So you can see this is going to keep these a lot softer and lighter, really helping our eye to visually see that the lighter colors will look more raised. Darker colors always look like they're further back. And then I'm going to use my white pencil just to bridge out those colors, blend through the remaining space and flatten the tooth. In these smaller petals it's nice and easy because you don't have a whole lot of detail. In the larger ones we do though, so we'll come through the middle and that'll blend the colors smooth into each other, but we'll need to do another layer in these middle ones to really flatten and focus on that texture again. So grab the carmine red and you can just do your strokes of this straight over the top again. Make sure your pencil is nice and sharp for that control. And then the blush pink. And then your white pencil coming straight through the middle. And you can even use that colorless blender to push the pencil out. And that is actually your rose all finished up. So I'm just going to zoom out and you can see the flower in its entirety. So all the light source that we've looked at here today, the detail to create the different depths, heights and levels in your flower, these techniques can be applied to absolutely any image at all, not just the rose that we've done here today. So now it's up to you to take what you've learnt, to practice. You can do this tutorial again. The first time you learn a technique, don't forget it's going to be your worst. So this is going to be your worst practice of this image and this technique because it's the first time you've done it. Even if you have been coloring for a while, you can never expect to go in and master a technique the first time around. There's still times that I'll try new things and it will just completely bomb out. But the more you do it, the more it sinks in, the more you can tweak and change and ask for help as well so you can improve. Remember to change perspective before you do any viewing of your coloring, just like we talked about in chapter 1. This is crucial to you understanding how to view your work. So remember, get up out of the chair, do some hand stretches, open and close the whole way. Slightly just turn your neck to each side, nod yes, and shake no. Get up and do a lap of walking around the room. Then come back, hold the coloring out at arm's length or prop it up against the wall and step back. Give yourself that little bit of distance so you can see everything in entirety. We need to move out of that up close mode where we're scrutinizing every detail because that's not how we view coloring. It's a little bit like, those impressionist paintings. When you're up close, you just see the paint blobs on the page. But when you step back, you see the picture. That's what we're aiming for today. That's how we view our work. And it's not about focusing on what's not right, what's imperfect. It's about focusing on the fact that yes, you have grown and you have stepped forward today. So give yourself a huge pat on the back. I'm super proud of you. If you'd like to chat tips, whether you're a little bit unhappy or whether you are happy with it, send it through. Make sure to ask for feedback when you're sending the photo so I know. Pop it through on email or messenger on Facebook and we'll chat together one-on-one to help you go forward. I hope you share your coloring around as well. You've worked really hard today. Share it on our Facebook group, Instagram, your blogs, any way you like, even in other groups as well. But please just, if you can mention that you're learning over at Kid and Clouder and what class this is from, that would be so appreciated so others can come and learn with us as well. So thank you so much for watching. Can't wait to see how you go, and I'll see you in the classrooms next time. Welcome to the markers portion of the video tutorial. Now you should have watched the start of this video where we go through all of the art theories on how we're going to tackle the shading on the rose. If you haven't, please go back and watch this step before starting the coloring. Okay, now the stroke we're going to do on the markers, we talked about at the start how we wanted a little bit of texture, and that's what we're going to aim to achieve here. So this is a little bit different. So I'm just going to show you off to the side. It's always good to practice as well before you jump onto your final image. So what we're going to be doing is I'm basically going to be doing a hybrid between feathering and between flicking. We're going to use a flicking motion. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be holding the marker nice and close to the nib and holding it upright so I'm working on the point. And I'm going to be overlapping these strokes but close together. So typically when we do texture, we leave spaces between the flicks, and that's what keeps the texture nice and visible. This time though, I'm going to have them close together, and as I finish the stroke, I want to space a little bit. So what you're going to end up getting is these strokes that are close together like this, but then as we're exiting them, notice that you've got these little points on the ends, but down here, it's nice and blended together. That's going to give you a really, really soft texture because as I come through and I overlap colors on top of each other in the same way, so always the same stroke with each color. So as I overlap them, you'll notice that you do see a bit of that texture peeking through. That's going to stop it from just looking completely smooth all over. You're going to get that natural variation that the rose has. So we're just thinking about that materiality like we talked at the start of this chapter, thinking of ways that we can utilize our markers to create the texture and still have it be soft. We don't want this really strong sort of stripy look, and you'll get a stripy look if you space your strokes apart like this, if you like how we do hair. If you're spacing, then you're going to get really strong stripes. So we want it softer like this, but we don't want it blended. So you don't want to just feather blend like we normally do, which is where everything's very close together. Some form of variation is going to help you get that texture. So let's come through, we'll work on adding this in. Now I'm actually going to start with my cast shadows. So remember at the start we talked about when different objects are overlapping, we're going to add the shadow always on the object below or behind, and that's what we're going to do here. Now we can start just by coming through and adding a nice strong cast shadows beneath any areas that are on top, and you can see I'm just drawing them like almost like a line. I'm not really adding any texture in with that one. That's because this color is so dark, but it will add so much depth by going this dark. It's really going to make it look more three-dimensional. So I do want the depth that's there, but I don't really want to have a lot of deep dark strokes with it. It's sticking only to my cast shadow points. Now the good thing is we're blending this out, so it doesn't matter how thick your stroke is. So if you're using bullet tips or you're still getting comfy with fine lines and this stroke is a lot thicker than what I'm doing here now, that is absolutely okay. It's still going to look great at the end. So make sure you aren't comparing your line weights with mine or with anyone else. Everyone's just at different points of learning those fine lines, and the way you learn is by practicing. So exactly what you're doing today is refining your work with them, even if it doesn't quite feel like it sometimes. When we've got two lines coming in like here, we're going to flesh it out a little bit. This is like the inside, so like you're looking down inside that part of the petal. So we actually want to create a little bit of depth in those points so it doesn't just look like an outline. And even in some of these areas where you've got your absolute depths, you can just add that little bit more shading so it doesn't just look like that outline area. Now, as you get through here, some of these spots get a little bit finer. So take your time, just try not to press the marker down into the page. I'm only just really lightly dabbing and touching to the page. That's your key to keeping it soft, like we went through at the very, very start of the video when we talked about how to just lightly touch the marker to the page. I find speeding myself up really helps with this too. When you're thinking it through, you tend to take your time and push down, and working quicker means that you're not really thinking it through so much. You can just work through the spots a little bit quicker there and a bit lighter. But again, if any of these areas end up a lot darker or thicker than what I've done, it's all okay. It's still going to look great at the end. Coming around the side here. I just want you to remember that when you're doing the shading, it's never about comparison with what I'm doing. It can be so tempting to do that because you think you're doing a class, you want it to look like the teachers. But that's not the point of you doing your coloring here today. The point is just to learn even just one little thing. Regardless of what it looks like, then it will mean you have grown and you have leveled up. So it's time to stop thinking that perfect is the only success. I want you to celebrate every practice you do and be empowered to keep trying, because every time you do this, you're going to get better and better. But in these starting steps, the first time you try new techniques, this is going to be the worst of your coloring because you don't yet have experience. So when you try something new and you go, well, that was a challenge, of course it's going to be a challenge because you don't have that knowledge behind you, and it's going to be the worst attempt just simply because of that. So accept, give yourself a pat on the back, and then practice again. Move on and practice so you can start growing. Now at this point, remember we talked about it starts to fan out at the central point here. So I'm adding in a bit more shading, just like we did in these higher points, just to show that there is a lot more depth there. We're sort of seeing down inside the petal as it curves through. So it's not a lot of detail with this color, but it's more about separating. And I think that's everything there. And you can see already that it's starting to take shape. You're starting to be able to see what petals there are. You've separated them all out. Now we're going to come in with R39, and we're going to come straight over the top of that stroke, and we're going to now work on that flicking motion. So you can see here multiple strokes. I want to get the line between the colors soft, so I might do multiple strokes there, and then I come through and I'm extending out those little flicks. Flicks take practice. A light touch is how you get them. And even if your flower just ends up blended today, you're still going to have light source. You're still going to have all the important things that we've talked about. And the texture may be something that you just aim to work on for next time. But practice it. Do your best. Every petal is a chance to refine the technique. So you may find half of the flower is a little messy, and then you start to get it, and it starts to come together. But I will say as well, halfway through, the halfway point like this now, it is going to feel unfinished. It's going to feel messy, and it's purely because it isn't complete. When something's incomplete, it's always going to feel that way because you don't have that context, that perspective to actually show what the finished result's going to look like. So no judging halfway through. I want you to just accept and trust the process and keep going. The end result is going to be completely different from where we're at right now. So you can see I'm mainly working on blending out the cast shadows at this point, but I will come back with this color and add a little bit more detail shortly. I'm keeping this color in my form shadow area only, not really coming too far out because we have quite a few different colors to get to. And you'll notice with the blend that we're using here today, we're actually using quite a lot of markers, and not all the markers have been chosen to get us smoothly from dark to light. A lot of the colors have actually been chosen for tone of color, so you can create some new complex color blends. So that's really important to remember too. You don't always blend out with colors to actually blend. You blend out to create new colors. And if you want a little bit more information on how color theory works, don't forget to check out that free Markers 101 class that we've been talking about too. It goes through a lot of color theory, how to create blends, and start experimenting yourself. I'm going to add my feathered stroke here as well. Now notice that it's coming from the top and bottom of these straight sections, coming in toward each other. And my strokes aren't all the same length too. Different lengths will break up the space so it looks a lot softer. You don't want the colors just to end in a band. Okay, going to add a few extra details. We're going to come along these outer edges, and like we talked about, where the indents are coming in toward the middle, think of them as being pulled and creating your detail line. So I'm just going to come in here, we'll add a few strokes from this top. Now, we want this area here to remain uncolored, like that's raised right up, and then we've added the darker color here to show the raise point, and then all of a sudden it slants and goes down. That's what that's communicating. Now if you're using bullet tip markers or you're still getting comfy with fine lines, you can even leave out this step or have a little practice. I like to print two images side by side, so things I'm unsure about, I can do a little practice. That always helps. One thing you can do as well is turn your image around. I actually find it's easier to color toward the line, and that way what you're actually doing is the bulk of the marker will fall inside. So if this is really thick, but it's thick this way, it doesn't matter. But if you come in from this side and you're heavy-handed, you may accidentally sort of press down outside of the line. This way you can have a little bit more control, because the petals are quite big, so even if the strokes are large, it's not really going to make a huge difference by the time you've blended it all out at the end. Now on this flower, on this petal here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this line up and around on the edge. I'm creating a ridge. I want that end bit there to look raised up, and then we want to change that direction and slant it in. So I've drawn a line and I'll add some shading out from that point. That'll help us to show that ridge. I'm going to leave these very highest petals uncolored. We'll come back and add a little bit more detail to them shortly with some of the lighter colors, but I really want them to look raised up. I'm going to do a little ridge on this side as well, so creating a little line, and we're shading out, so leaving that area light. Notice the shading is almost triangular in nature too. That creates more depth for us. And then along this upper one, we'll just add just a little bit. It's not a lot that I'm adding in, but it's just hinting at where the color is dark or where the petal's sort of curving back, or you've got those little creases happening. And I'm even going to, on this part here, what I want this to look like. Typically on the rose, that part comes up toward us and then it curves back in like a little neck, and then it gets wider again. So I'm adding actually a little bit of shading through that middle area. And that way you'll create that undulating effect. Alright, once you've done that, it's time to move on to the next color. This is where it starts getting brighter. So R27, and we come back the whole way over the previous and we extend a little further out, focusing on spacing out the edges of the strokes. Again, just do what you're able. Even if it ends up fully blended, it's still going to look great at the end. You're still going to have all that light source. But we're just trying to have a focus on it so you can start learning the technique and start refining it. I come back over all of the colors with this one because I want to tone it. We've got all that beautiful depth that we've created with the R39 and R59, but it's not really that bright red that we associate with the red rose. By adding this R27 over the top, you can see it makes even those shadows look brighter. Coming in from this other side, starting to add some shading down. So you can see the shading with markers here, if you use both mediums. Markers is a lot faster than pencils, definitely achieving faster look, but you achieve less detail. We can still get some really nice detail happening here and really nice vibrancy. You don't need to layer pencils to create the vibrancy. It's still going to look really beautiful at the end. But two different mediums get you two different finishes and looks. So it's always fun to play with both, so you can really start to achieve the different looks and use the mediums you like to give you the outcome you want with your coloring, depending on what it is that you're coloring and what you want that look to be. Again, try and make those strokes all different lengths, try and avoid getting a band of color. Now on this petal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this darker color around the side, and we're going to create that little lip again. But I want the edge to be darker because we're looking from the side, and that will sort of curve down and around. Then we'll have the raised up bit, and then it will get a little bit darker in here. So anywhere that you're adding darker color, it's typically going to look lower. Lighter areas will look higher. So don't just add color, think about why you're adding it where and what it's communicating. Adding color to the edges of the petals like this helps them look like they're rounding down and around away from the light. Alright, just a little bit on the end there. Next color, R24. So we're just moving through these color families, extending further out each time and slowly coming toward your highlight. Now you can see I'm still trying to space out the edges of these strokes, so I am encouraging texture as well rather than just smooth all over blending. But it will look really messy at this point because you've got the contrast of the white of the paper between all of that color. So it's going to look really funny at this point. So don't worry at all. By the time you add your darkest color, or your lightest color, sorry, it will absolutely come together. But you may find that you need to do extra layers, just like we did in the leaves as well. So you can have a little bit more control on not only the depth of color, but the smoothness of your blend, or even the texture of your blend too, because doing an extra layer means you can come back and really focus on those textures. Alright, next color, R22. Definitely getting lighter now. This is coming toward the pinks. And you can see here I'm covering a lot more area, but I'm trying not to join all the strokes. There's still highlight through that middle point. Definitely starting to make a little bit more visual sense now, the closer the colors get. R20 is my next color, and this is going to be the lightest through these main petals. We do have one more lighter color which we'll use on these softer petals. But the R23 here, and I'm just doing multiple strokes. Multiple strokes will take the edge off. So it's just going to help blend the colors together a little bit more. We do want contrast between colors because we want to show the heights and levels, but the rose isn't typically a shiny material, so we don't want stark contrast between white and color because that usually is what indicates high shine. So instead of having that starkness, that bright white, we're toning that back so it's more of this pink with the R20. You can see it just brings everything together, it softens it down even more. I'm leaving again those lighter areas because we'll come through, we'll add in an even lighter color again, so we can make those petals definitely look like they're sitting even more forward. Now what you will notice is when I add this color, because it is so light, it works almost like a colorless blender. So a blender marker, if you're new to using Copic, doesn't actually blend. Think of it more like a color stripper. It actually pulls away the ink. So how it works is it's just the alcohol component of your alcohol marker without the pigment. And it basically dilutes color down, because what it does is you're adding more alcohol to the alcohol ink that you've already added, which flushes that color away. So it's basically like a diluter is a better term for it. And the lighter colors work in that same way, because you're essentially flushing more alcohol in with not a lot more pigment. So it will desaturate and push away that darker color from the page because you're diluting it down. So what we do to combat that is you can do extra layers. Now I find usually the very darkest color doesn't really need an extra layer. Like the R59 is still pretty strong there. It's sort of the colors in between. So I would come in with R39 and I would repeat from that color. And you can even come around all your car shadows again. But doing this a second time, just like we did on the leaves, it just holds so much better because you've got a base already there. And it will blend better, it'll be stronger, and you can even focus more on your fine lines here. You've got a second chance to really work on them. So there's a lot of practice for your fine lines in an image like this, and that's great, because if it's something you struggle with, if you struggle with fine lines, you need to actively seek the images that are going to push you to practice them, because every time you shy away from them, they're not getting easier. So try and do more images like this where you're getting that repetitive practice. It will sink in. R27 is next, and you're just repeating exactly the same as what you did earlier. Now if you find you're a little light-handed with darker colors too, you can even extend further the second time around. I think it's really normal for people to be a little bit nervous of darker colors when they're starting out, but the idea is that when you've got a standard light source like ambient lighting, sun up in the sky, each color should really be used equally. So you're extending each color equal amounts as you work across the page, and that will keep it all consistent. It will keep your color nice and rich. And that way your shadows will still be nice and prominent. So I think people get a little bit scared, think, oh, it's going to look so dark at the end if I am heavy-handed with the darker color. But that's what gives you that pop. Gives you that depth to show distance between objects, to really emphasize what's sort of happening here, the directions, the distances. So never shy away from it. And if you ever make mistakes with it, you'll only make them once. And then you go, okay, well, that just turned out really, really dark. And then you know to pare it back for next time. But again, your class time is practice time. Use it to practice. I'd rather you make mistakes and not love what you've done here as a finished project, but love the fact that you've learned a lot as an exercise, because that's all it is. Classes are just exercises to help you grow and level up. Don't treat them always like finished projects. You can see this is R24 now, but you can see the colors definitely starting to hold a little stronger too with this second round of the blend. Again, halfway point always looks messy, don't worry. We've got R22 now, we start to close that gap. Not all the way though, make sure you leave room for the lightest color to come through the highlight. And then R20 to finish through there. Now you can see I work fairly quickly. I'm still working in strokes because I don't want to saturate it too much. The more layers I add with the lighter color, the less contrast I'm going to have, because every layer you do darkens it. So you want to make sure that you're still covering the area, but you're working in strokes and you're working quickly, so you still have that nice variation. Last little bit left, we just want to do these lighter petals here now. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to come in with those darker colors, because I want these petals to absolutely look like they're sitting forward. They're a lot lighter and brighter. So I'm actually going to start from R22. And we're just dabbing a little bit of this through these areas here. It's just quick and simple. Make sure you try and leave a little bit of a gap top and bottom so you can have variation. Then in these larger petals, we'll add a little bit more detail. Think of them as curving over. So the part that's curving away is the back. So we'll start at the back here and add in that shading coming forward. And then over on this side, any areas that are being pulled in, adding in that detail like we talked about earlier as well. Creating these little creases, the little almost folds in the petals. And same with this big one here as well. So markers is all about just layering until you're happy with the blends, basically. And you're layering using that light source that we've been going through over and over. And utilizing your color theory to help you achieve that. Darker colors in shadow areas. Blending out and getting lighter toward highlights. So you create direction, you create movement, you create distance. R20 is next. Come straight over the top of the R22 through these areas and blend in a little bit. And the same through these areas. and then R30. And R30 will come through your remaining area. This is a nice and light color, so still apply in strokes as well. But this is a really light color now, not too different from the white of the page. So it's helping you to still achieve contrast even on these lighter petals. But notice the whole color blend is so light compared to the other petals, and it really helps these ones look like they're sitting even higher, getting more of the light hitting their surface. Now you can do a second round if you want, layering up the colors. So you can come in, this is R22, literally just repeating just like we have in the other steps. It'll help you get a little bit more depth, so it'll look a little bit closer in line with the other petals in the scene as well. And of course helps you to blend a little bit better. R20 is next. And then your R30. And now I'm going to zoom out because that is actually your rose all finished up. So all the light source that we've looked at here today, the detail to create the different depths, heights, and levels in your flower, these techniques can be applied to absolutely any image at all, not just the rose that we've done here today. So now it's up to you to take what you've learned to practice. You can do this tutorial again. The first time you learn a technique, don't forget it's going to be your worst. So this is going to be your worst practice of this image and this technique because it's the first time you've done it. Even if you have been coloring for a while, you can never expect to go in and master a technique the first time around. There's still times that I'll try new things and it will just completely bomb out. But the more you do it, the more it sinks in, the more you can tweak and change and ask for help as well so you can improve. Remember to change perspective before you do any viewing of your coloring, just like we talked about in chapter 1. This is crucial to you understanding how to view your work. So remember, get up out of the chair, do some hand stretches, open and close the whole way. Slightly just turn your neck to each side, nod yes and shake no. Get up and do a lap of walking around the room. Then come back, hold the coloring out at arm's length or prop it up against the wall and step back. Give yourself that little bit of distance so you can see everything in entirety. We need to move out of that up close mode where we're scrutinizing every detail because that's not how we view coloring. It's a little bit like, you know, those impressionist paintings. When you're up close, you just see the paint blobs on the page. But when you step back, you see the picture. That's what we're aiming for today. That's how we view our work. And it's not about focusing on what's not right, what's imperfect. It's about focusing on the fact that yes, you have grown and you have stepped forward today. So give yourself a huge pat on the back. I'm super proud of you. If you'd like to chat tips, whether you're a little bit unhappy or whether you are happy with it, send it through. Make sure to ask for feedback when you're sending the photo so I know. Pop it through on email or messenger on Facebook and we'll chat together one-on-one to help you go forward. I hope you share your coloring around as well. You've worked really hard today. Share it on our Facebook group, Instagram, your blogs, anywhere you like, even in other groups as well. But please just, if you can mention that you're learning over at Kid and Clouder and what class this is from, that would be so appreciated so others can come and learn with us as well. So thank you so much for watching. Can't wait to see how you go, and I'll see you in the classrooms next time.